Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 47. 47 Daily Annoyance at Ante, 1. In this way, Su Qian received 1 tael and 4 coins of silver. In addition to his original 3 coins and the 1 coin he picked up, he received 2 taels of silver in total. And the gold biao that Su Qian had his eyes on was worth 10 taels of silver. He used the same method to help the 3 ladies solve the riddles, and finally gathered 5 taels of silver. It should be enough to buy a golden biao, but I still have to buy one for Aunt. Young master. The shopkeeper's pale face interrupted Su Qian's deep thoughts. Su Qian looked at him in silence. Young master, can you please show some mercy? Shopkeeper, your words are meaningless. You set the rules. Young master, just tell me what you want. I want to buy 2 gold biao, but I only have enough silver for 1 n, the half-price kind. I'll see you off, young master. The shop owner gritted his teeth. I'm sorry about that. Please don't come again, this old man will be very grateful. You can't afford to play? Su Qian walked away with his golden steps in satisfaction. I'm not that kind of person, but the store manager is too polite. As for the store manager's feelings, he didn't care. To be able to open such a store, 20 to 30 taels of silver was painful, but it wasn't a big loss. Moreover, since he was using this kind of strategy and benefited from it, he had to be prepared to meet an expert. It didn't make sense that only you could earn other people's money and others couldn't take advantage of you. Not long after he left the shop, the hair on his back suddenly stood up, and his pores seemed to be pricked by fine needles. This made his heart beat faster and his adrenaline rush. Someone is following me, they're looking at me, a hidden hostility. Su Qian had a vague understanding. Su Qian remained calm and pretended that nothing had happened, but he was calculating in his heart. Who's following me? Treasure Tool Pavilion? Obviously not. Although the shopkeeper looked like he wanted to beat me up, an expert who could make my hair stand on end definitely had a strong background. A mere treasure instrument pavilion did not have such a talent. Yunlu Academy? That's not right either. The great Confucians of Yunlu Academy are all fighting to take me in as their disciple. Why would he be hostile to me? It was the Zhou Mansion. At this stage, if there was anyone who harbored enmity towards him and was secretly monitoring him, it would definitely be the Zhou Mansion. Su Qian's heart trembled. His experience from his previous life told him that once you were being followed and monitored, it meant that the other party would make a move soon, or even tonight. My intention to visit Yunlu Academy was correct. Even if second uncle and I aren't weak, the women in my family are. Burden. Su Qian's face was solemn. The plan to deal with the Zhou Mansion could not be delayed. After returning to the Su Mansion, Su Qian immediately took out the military crossbow that he had exchanged with Songqing, the Directorate of Celestials, from the cabinet. He hung it on his waist and tied the heart-protecting mirror to his chest. Only then did he gain a little sense of security. She climbed over the wall to the main house and saw Su Lingying chasing away a flock of geese in the backyard. She put her hands on her waist and stomped her feet hard, scaring the little geese into a panic and running around. Big brother, do you think I'm mighty? Su Ling saw that his big brother had returned and became even more proud. Where did the goose come from? Su Qian was stunned. It was clearly not there when he left home this morning. Mother asked someone to buy it and said that she raised it at home. Su Lingying tilted her head and said, I forgot the rest. It was probably cheaper to raise them at home than to buy them outside. Oh, Su Qian replied. Be careful, don't step on the goose. Don't you have a goose? The big goose is over there. I'll go chase it out. Su Lingying volunteered to enter the flower bed with her short legs. A few seconds later, the child's shrieking like a pig being slaughtered was heard. The bushes shook violently, and Su Lingying escaped while crying. She dragged a big white goose on her feet, biting her short leg. She looked like she was about to die. "Big brother, help!" Su Qian stood by and laughed like a pig. At dusk, second Uncle Su returned from his duty. He was dressed in military attire with a long saber and a military crossbow hanging from his waist. He looked like an eagle and a wolf, and his temperament was completely different from when he was wearing ordinary clothes. The three of them came to the study room. After Louis served them hot tea, she obediently left. "I've already arranged everything with my big brother," Su Siju said. "We can send mother and sister to the academy tomorrow. It just so happens that Lingying is about to begin her enlightenment. The teacher father hired is not of good quality and can't teach her, but the teacher in the academy should be fine." When Lingying heard this good news, she would definitely cry with joy. Su Qian suddenly thought of the funny jokes he had used in his previous life to give a warm-hearted child a box of exercise books. Second Uncle Su was overjoyed. This had undoubtedly solved one of his worries. The women in the family could be properly taken care of, and he would not have any worries. "Farewell, it's all thanks to you. I knew that letting you study was the best thing I've ever done in my life." "Father, it's big brother's credit. It has nothing to do with me," Su Siju said, a little embarrassed. "Ninjian." Second Uncle Su looked at his nephew in surprise. After listening to his son's explanation, Second Uncle Su said regretfully, "Ninjian, the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life was to send you to practice martial arts." Second Uncle Su now believed that his nephew was a scholar. "I'm just using the knowledge I learned in my previous life effectively. There's something I need to tell second uncle," Su Qian said in a deep voice. "I was followed when I came back." "Farewell, what about you?" The father and son's expressions changed. "What?" Su Nian frowned. "Even if I'm being followed, how would I know? He was only a scholar in the Enlightenment state." Second Uncle Su stood up and paced back and forth anxiously. He said in a deep voice, "Ninjian, you'll stay in the residence tonight. We'll stay closer so we can take care of each other. In addition, I'll go out later to inform the Royal Sword Guards and ask them to increase the intensity of their patrols in the vicinity." Su Nian and Su Qian looked at each other, their hearts heavy. During the meal, Su Qian glanced at his sister, Su Lingyu, who was eating elegantly. He coughed to attract the attention of the family. He took out a small red wooden box with the words Treasure Instrument Pavilion carved on it and slowly opened it. It was an exquisitely made gold biao with an exquisitely carved flower head inlaid with pearls, and thin gold tassels hung down. Without looking at the style, just the weight of the gold was enough to make the whole family look at it. Su Lingyu and her aunt were dumbfounded. Two pairs of big Kazi-land eyes stared at Jin Biao. Jewelry like Jin Biao had always been sought after by the daughters and women of rich families because of its fine workmanship and expensive materials. Ordinary women could not afford to wear such good jewelry. His aunt used to have a golden ornament carved with flowers, which was a treasure. Su Qian was a single man. Naturally, he would not buy a gold biao for no reason. There were only two women in the family who were suitable to wear it. As the matriarch of the family, a smile bloomed on Auntie's beautiful face, and her eyes turned gentle. "At least you still have some conscience. Hand it over." Su Qian placed the golden dangling ornament in front of Su Lingyu. "Sister, this is for you." Su Lingyu's eyes widened in disbelief. The jewelry of Precious Artifacts store was very famous in this area. The workmanship was fine and exquisite, and it was very popular with the girls and women of the rich families nearby. "Thank you, big brother." Her beautiful face revealed a sincere smile, and her eyes curved like crescent moons. The aunt's body trembled as her chest heaved up and down in anger. Her eyes reddened as she questioned second uncle. "Tell me, do you want me or your nephew?" She and this little rascal were irreconcilable. Second Uncle Su glared at his nephew and quickly picked up some food for his wife. Calm down, don't lower yourself to the same level as the stinky brat. Su Qian felt someone kick her in the leg. She looked up at Su Nian beside her. Su Erlang lowered his head and continued eating. Chapter 48. 48 and, humph, at least the little bastard still has a conscience. 1. Auntie was angry, and her beautiful face was as cold as ice, the kind that could not be coaxed. Second Uncle Su's scalp turned numb and he complained, Ninjian, it's good that you have money to supplement your family. Why do you have to buy these flashy but useless things? He planned to diss his nephew to find his wife's approval and dispel her anger. We don't lack food and clothing at home, Su Lingyu said lightly. Big brother's salary is also included in father's food. Second Uncle Su was choked by his daughter's words, so he changed the topic again. Ninjian, where did you get the silver? Su Qian said, I saw that the jewelry on my sister's head was too cheap, so I remembered it in my heart. I reduced my clothes and diet to save some money. In addition, there's a half-price guessing game in the treasure instrument pavilion. He could not say that the jewelry was from Baiyan. He did not want to end up like Su Siju and suffer a social death. Su Lingyu's hands trembled slightly as she held the bowl. Her heart suddenly softened, and she stared at Su Qian with her eyes full of tears. In this family, only her eldest brother cared about her. Her father and second brother had never felt that there was anything wrong with her wearing cheap jewelry. A girl also needed to keep up appearances. Big brother, is it good? She inserted the golden bio into her hair bun, and the candlelight reflected the girl's sharp oval face. Her facial features were exquisite, and her black eyes were bright and lively. The auntie was even more jealous. Su Qian was also jealous. He looked at Su Erlang on the left. The younger brother was wearing a navy blue robe. His black and beautiful long hair was tied up with a green jade hairpin. His lips were red and his teeth were white. He was extremely handsome. Then, he looked at the girl who was shining with the golden bio and the beautiful auntie. Everyone in the family has been kissed by an angel, and I'm the only one who's ordinary. When he saw the little bean, who had facial features similar to second Uncle Su's, he was no longer jealous. Come, Ling Ying, eat meat. Su Qian picked up a piece of fatty meat for her, and then picked up some lean meat for Su Lingyu. Big brother is the best. You're the most pleasing to big brother. Then why didn't big brother save me just now? The little boy remembered that not only did his big brother not save her just now, but he also laughed loudly. Only through suffering can one rise above others. Only through suffering can one become an invincible expert. Then, is there anyone who can be invincible without suffering? Yes, in a dream. When they were almost done eating, his aunt said lightly, Ninjian will be 20 after the new year. Oh, auntie actually remembers my age. Su Qian was very surprised. The auntie ignored him and turned to second Uncle Su. Master, we have to arrange a marriage for Ninjian. Su Lingyu and Su Nian raised their heads at the same time and stared at their mother. Su Qian was the slowest. She was stunned for a few seconds before she reacted. Then, she found it hard to believe. The unlucky aunt is actually interested in my nephew's marriage. Is the sun going to rise from the west tomorrow? One had to know that getting married was a very grand event. The 3 books, 6 rites, and 8 palanquins were all silver. The aunt looked at her unlucky nephew and continued, I think Louis R is not bad. She was raised in the manor since she was young, and she and Ninjian are childhood sweethearts. And he didn't even need to spend any money as expected, an aunt was still an aunt. The pretty Louis R let out an ah, her cheeks were flushed, and she was at a loss. Love came too quickly like a tornado, blowing her into a daze. In her heart, she was both shy and embarrassed, but also a little happy. Su Lingyu looked at the head maidservant who seemed to be dull in front of her and was a little unhappy. Mother, don't make your own decisions. Let Big Brother discuss his marriage with father. The unspoken meaning was, Mother, don't you know what position you have in Big Brother's heart? The aunt hated her daughter for snatching her hairpin and scolded, Ningyan and Lui are a beautiful couple, and they know each other very well. Is it your turn as a sister to object? Su Lingyu turned her head away in grievance. No, it's too much to know the root of the problem. It's not that far yet. Su Qian was just about to express his opinion when he heard his younger brother speak. Mother feels that Lui's marriage to Big Brother will not only exempt you from the betrothal money, but also give you a reason to move out, Su Nian said. It was a hit. You child, you've never known how to talk, his aunt said angrily. Second Uncle Su made a final conclusion. That's enough. You don't have to worry about this. Ninjian won't get close to women until he reaches the qi refining stage. Lu Er's face was filled with disappointment as she lowered her head. Other than the madam who had served her since she was young, the whole family seemed to be against her marrying the eldest son. After second Uncle Su finished his dinner, he ran away with the imperial sword guards and then went to the study to discuss tomorrow's matters with his nephew and son. When he returned to his room, he saw his wife sitting by the bed, looking angry. Do you have to be so angry until now? Second Uncle Su said helplessly. The auntie turned around and stared at him with her beautiful eyes. That little brat of yours has no conscience at all. When I took him from you, he was still the size of a kitten. Who raised him? You only know how to anger me, you only know how to anger me. Why raise him up? It's better to feed him to rats. As she muttered to herself, she suddenly saw her husband take out a wooden box from his arms and hand it over. The wooden box was engraved with the words Treasure Instrument Pavilion. She opened her red mouth and looked at her husband in confusion and shock. Ninjian asked me to give this to you. Second Uncle Su said helplessly, since neither of you are willing to bow your head and admit defeat, he's too embarrassed to give it to you. That's why I didn't take it out on the table. The aunt opened the box anxiously. Inside was a golden biao that was heavier than her daughter's and more exquisite. She held the mirror in her hand and walked to the bronze mirror. She sat on the dressing table and put it on. An oval-shaped face would make a woman look dignified, especially after becoming a married woman. The woman with the oval face was delicate and pretty, but once she became a married woman, she was beautiful. His aunt belonged to the latter. She looked at herself in the bronze mirror and snorted. That little bastard still has some conscience. Second Uncle Su stood by the window on the other side of the room and stared at the quiet courtyard with a serious expression. Beside him was the standard saber of the Royal Saber Guard. It was a peaceful night, and second Uncle Su and Su Qian, who had not slept all night, felt relieved. When she woke up in the morning, Su Lingyu was still wearing a thin layer of clothing. She opened the window and stretched her beautiful figure in the cool air. Miss, what are you looking at by the window? I didn't see anything. After a while. Miss, are you waiting for something? I'm not waiting for anything. Young miss, quickly come over and dress up. I know you're so annoying. Second Uncle Su left the house at dawn and gathered the imperial sword guards under him. Su Qian went out to rent a carriage, while Su Erlang stayed at home to instruct the servants to tidy up the luggage. When it was around noon, 2 horse carriages and dozens of riders exited the city gates, rushing towards the northwest where the Yunlu Academy was located. The speed of the carriage was not fast. It took them 4 hours to reach the foot of Mount Clear Cloud. The 3 men of the Su family heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. Is it too paranoid? Second Uncle Su frowned. Su Erlang, who was good at military tactics, said slowly, if the people who followed Big Brother yesterday were really from the Zhou mansion, then they have already missed 2 of the best opportunities to make a move. But it's also possible that in Assistant Minister Zhou's eyes, We're just ants that can be crushed at any time and are not in a hurry to deal with. He's in even greater trouble. Underestimating the enemy was a great taboo in the military, but the premise was that the two sides were evenly matched, or the difference was not that great. The Su family was indeed nothing compared to the Zhou family. But there's one thing we have to face. If Assistant Minister Zhou is not eliminated, we will die. Su Qian said in a deep voice. The little one's happy laughter interrupted their conversation. She poked her head out of the curtain and looked at the scenery of the suburbs excitedly. Su Lingying had always thought that he was out to play. Su Qian found her annoying and pointed at the outline of Yunlu Academy in the distance. Do you know where that place is? I don't know, big brother. Su Ling chuckled, her round face like an apple. That's second brother's academy. Su Qian said. The word academy made Su Lingying alert. She looked at her brother. Su Qian nodded. We're going to send you to school. You're not allowed to go home anymore. The smile on Su Lingying's face slowly disappeared, and she looked at her brother in a daze. She quietly shrank back into the car, and a few seconds later, there was a loud cry. Mother, I don't want to go to the academy. I don't want to study. You're so noisy. Your big brother is lying to you. Why would big brother lie to me? Because he's a bastard. Su Qian's mood was lifted. When they arrived at the foot of the mountain, Su Qian and Su Siju went to visit Zhang Shen. However, the person who welcomed them was the great scholar, Li Mubai. Where's the teacher? Su Siju asked. He's in closed-door cultivation. Li Mubai glanced at Su Qian and said, I've already had someone arrange a courtyard. Thank you, Su Si, I said. My sister is still in the enlightenment stage. Can you allow her to study in the academy for a while? This request was not too much. If Su Lingyu wanted to study, the academy would definitely reject her. However, Su Lingying was only a 5-year-old child. In this era, scholars did not reject the idea of teaching children. They even advocated such a thing. It was just that children from ordinary families could not afford to study. Li Mubai nodded in agreement. 2 days passed by in a hurry. In the early morning, Su Siju, who was busy entertaining his classmates, second Uncle Su, who was inquiring about news, and Su Qian, who had not been to the bar to listen to music for 3 days, gathered in the study. Lu Yi had already accompanied them to Yunlu Academy. None of the 3 men were willing to do the task of serving tea. For the first time, they gathered all the information they had collected and planned to make a plan to deal with Jolie. Chapter 49. 49 Social Death, 1. Second Uncle Su's information was as follows. Jolie has been very well behaved these few days. He was probably warned by Assistant Minister Zhou and did not do anything against the law. He indulges himself with a group of people in the government office and goes in and out of gambling houses, restaurants, and the academy. In addition, when my people followed him, they found that Jolie frequently went in and out of a house. There was no sign on the house, so it should be a private house he bought outside. There was a servant girl, an old woman, and an old man who watched the door. There was also a woman. That woman is most likely his mistress. Su Nian and Su Qian listened in silence, each in a different state of contemplation. Su Qian looked down at the ground, his fingertips subconsciously tapping on the table. Su Xian was looking up at the roof at a 45-degree angle. Wushuan was in his sleeves and he looked like he was in a daze. After second Uncle Su finished speaking, he looked at his nephew and son and said, "What do you guys think?" His nephew and son ignored him tacitly. They looked at each other and Su Nian said, "The students of our academy and the students of the Imperial College are not on the same side. They look down on each other and view each other as enemies. However, the same batch of high scholars would occasionally gather together. The orthodoxies are opposing, but individuals can have friendships. A high scholar from the same batch could be considered half a schoolmate. If they had a good relationship, they might be useful in the future. As for the battle for orthodoxy, it was secondary compared to personal interests. Jolie is an arrogant and despotic person. He has many disputes with many of his schoolmates in the Imperial College and had conflicts with them. But he's definitely not a brainless popinjay. Those who have a grudge against him all have ordinary backgrounds. Su Qian was not surprised by this. From the way Jolie dealt with him, he could analyze that the methods of this yamen were not brilliant, but they were effective and had a certain level of scheming and shrewdness. His arrogance was only directed at those who had lower backgrounds and forces than him. This has undoubtedly increased the difficulty of dealing with him. Su Qian sighed. Don't interrupt. Let me finish. Su Nian glared at him. Jolie has been infatuated with Miss Fu Xiang of the Education Workshop Division for a long time. However, he was repeatedly unsuccessful in the tea gathering. Lady Floating Fragrance. That courtesan of the Academy's workshop. The beauty that Constable Wang said was worth his life after sleeping with her for a night. Su Qian's spirit was lifted. Su Nian raised his teacup and looked at the empty cup. He put it down helplessly and said, I originally thought that we could drive the tiger to devour the wolf again. He had made use of the conflict between Jolie and his classmates to formulate a plan, but those classmates were not important enough. With Jolie's caution, it was too difficult and almost impossible for him to provoke a higher-ranking government. Jolie has been to the Imperial Academy's workshop many times. If you want to get more information, that Lady Floating Fragrance is an excellent breakthrough. Knock, knock. Su Qian knocked on the table. When second uncle and second brother Su looked over, he said in a deep voice, I have to remind you that we have to do subtraction at all times. The more complicated a plan is, the more loopholes it will have. It is impossible for us to have a complicated and intricate plan to deal with Jolie, because the gap between us is too great. Farewell. Don't fall into the wrong line of thought. It was easy for a scholar to be fooled by his own cleverness. When he was scheming against others, he would make it more difficult for himself to think about the exquisiteness of the layout and the superb means. This was especially true for the arrogant and well-read Su Siju. Su Siju furrowed his brows, agreeing but also unconvinced. What's your opinion, big brother? Simple. The simpler the better. The real traceless crime is killing with passion, Su Qian said after some thought. We have to do the same when we plan. How is it simple? First, don't involve too many people. Second, don't make things too complicated. If Jolie were to have a conflict with someone in the yamen, and that person's father happens to be able to arm wrestle with Assistant Minister Zhou, what would you do? All right, your silence explains everything. Su Qian waved his hand and interrupted the little brother's thoughts. There must be a lot of schemes and conspiracies flashing through the little brother's mind. My idea is that we can disguise ourselves and seize the opportunity to beat up the people in the government office and leave. Su Pingzi finally seized the opportunity to interject and slapped his thigh. Ninjian's idea is very much to my liking. The two brothers rolled their eyes at the same time. It's that simple. Su Siju frowned. Su Qian nodded. Simple doesn't mean it's ineffective. Most of the time, it's better to leave a blank. The one who was beaten up would wonder who he had offended recently. After some reflection, he realized that it was Jolie, that bastard. Jolie will definitely not admit to such a thing. However, this is not important. Everyone is free to judge. Anyway, the conflict has intensified. You hit me, so I will also take revenge. Su Siju was a smart and quick-witted man. He immediately understood what his big brother meant. Not bad, he nodded slightly with a proud expression. Big brother, what information have you gathered? Su Qian didn't keep him in suspense and said, I've found out who Assistant Minister Zhou's political enemy is. Su Nian and second Uncle Su bent over at the same time. Their faces suddenly became serious, and they looked like they were listening. Minister of Revenue, Su Qian sneered. The Minister of Revenue? Su Zinian's heart trembled, and many of his doubts were instantly resolved. No wonder Assistant Minister Zhou of the Ministry of Revenue wanted to scheme for the tax silver. He knew that he was about to be made fun of by his immediate superior and urgently needed a large amount of silver to make up for the deficit. And it was because they were both in the Ministry of Revenue that the Minister of Revenue could catch Assistant Minister Zhou's foxtail. Ninjian, how did you know about this? Second Uncle Su didn't believe it. How could ordinary people know about the fights between the big shots in the imperial court? Miss Cai Wei from the Directorate of Celestials told me. Su Qian said. And the price was just a stick of candied gourd, a roasted goose leg, a serving of wine meatball, and a bowl of fish ball soup, he silently added in his heart. Big-eyed beauties were easy to buy. This was an advantage. The weakness was that she had no interest in politics, and the Directorate of Celestials did not interfere in it, so what she knew was limited. This isn't good, Miss Kwei, you lack a book titled Su Dalin's Virtuous Wife's Self-Cultivation, I'll write it for you later. Su Qian clapped his hands and interrupted his cousin's deep thoughts. It seems that the information we have collected is not enough to make a detailed plan. But it's fine. We can't make a big deal out of this. What should we do next? Su Nian thought for a moment and said, I suggest going to the Education Workshop Division and getting some information from the courtesan Fu Xiang. I definitely can't do that. I never go to places with fireworks. It was common for great officials to flirt with women, but for students without an official position, it was another set of standards. You haven't even reached the end of your path in the imperial examination, and you're already thinking of playing with women? One look and you can tell he's unreliable. Don't even think about having a good future. It's like when I was studying, parents don't allow students to play online games. If a student spends all day in an internet cafe, he's a quasi-social scum. Su Qian leaned back in his chair and looked to the side. He said in a relaxed tone. I can't go either, because I haven't reached the qi refining stage. Then the question was, who was in charge of getting information from the Imperial Academy? The two brothers looked at second Uncle Su in tacit understanding. Why are you looking at me? Do you think I'm someone who would go to the Imperial Academy? I don't even know how to read, why would I go and invite a snub? Second Uncle Su expressed that he wasn't the kind of person who would miss the fireworks. Seeing that his father was unwilling, Su Nian threw the blame on Su Qian. It was written in a poem by Big Brother. It's very popular in the Imperial Academy. Second Uncle Su immediately rejected his son's suggestion and said with a frown, your big brother is an honest man who doesn't even go to the brothel. Let him go to the Imperial Academy to inquire. Don't let him get trapped in there before he gets it done and his body is taken by the woman in the brothel. For a martial artist at the peak of the essence refining realm, it was indeed a huge loss to lose his body before entering the qi refining realm. Su Qian, who never went to the brothel to listen to music, nodded to show that he was not that kind of person. Why don't you go? Second Uncle Su said. He still felt that a place like the Academy Square should only be visited by scholars. This was a fixed concept. Su Siju chuckled. Second Uncle Su had refused to go to the education workshop. Other than the fact that it was the territory of scholars and they didn't like rough iron, there was another reason. There was another reason why Su Siju had refused to go to the education workshop, other than the fact that students had to pay attention to their reputation and reputation. There was another reason why Su Qian refused to go to the teaching workshop, other than the fact that he never went to the brothel to listen to music. Social death. The three of them looked at each other and fell into silence. Chapter 50. 50 Pitchpot, 1. Why were they all afraid of social death? This involved a rule in the inner city. Unlike the outer city, the inner city did not have a curfew. The former was for the sake of the noble's safety, as the residents were all respectable people. After the drum was struck at dusk, there could be no one on the streets. As everyone knew, the education workshop worked at night. This meant that going to the Imperial Academy workshop was not only to inquire about information, but also to stay overnight. This was why Su Pingzi was against Su Qian going to the teaching workshop. He was a young and vigorous man. If he stayed overnight at the teaching workshop, who could resist the teasing of a girl? Therefore, whoever went to the education workshop division had to go to support. The three men in the room were all well known. The upright gentleman Su Siju. She did not seduce Su Qian. The Gu family's beloved wife, Su Pingzi. The three of them knew one thing very well. Even if there was a reason for it, it would not change the fact that they were afraid. Although I didn't flirt in my previous life, I can imagine the embarrassment of being flirted with and then being called by the police to inform my parents he simply didn't want to live. Su Qian sat up straight, his face serious and upright. Some interesting things about the brothels came to his mind. One time, when he was listening to music by the railing, Constable Wang had a topic. An official of the court had gone to the teaching workshop to sleep with a girl, but he had met his son during a tea party. It was an awkward scene. By the next day, the news had already spread throughout the capital's officialdom and was treated as a joke. Even Constable Wang had heard about it from County Magistrate Zhu. For an era that valued the three principles and five virtues as well as reputation, such an incident was an unbearable shame. Su Qian looked at second uncle Su and second son Su, and images appeared in his mind involuntarily. Su Nian Nian, oh, father, you're here too. You can give me this girl today. She'll be yours tomorrow. Second uncle Su, get lost. Who's the father? I'll sleep first. All of you, back off. I want to fight alone, Su Qian said. Just thinking about it made him shudder. Su Qian coughed. Let's put aside the Imperial Academy workshop for now. We'll continue to inquire about the news. After all, we don't have to go to the Imperial Academy. We're not sure if we can really get any useful information from the floating fragrance courtesan. Sit down again the day after tomorrow and gather the information. If there are no additional gains, we will consider going to the Imperial Academy. Hearing what he said, Su Erlang and second uncle Su's attitude changed for the better and they nodded. Su Qian thought, I'll make a sacrifice and go to the Imperial Academy tomorrow night. At noon the next day, Su Qian asked for leave and returned to the Su Manor. The Su Manor, which used to be quite lively, was much quieter. The maidservants and old maidservants took half of it away, leaving the gatekeeper, old Zhang, and a few servants to take care of it. Second uncle Su and second son Su had yet to return. Su Qian went to the inner courtyard with ease. He pushed open Su Erlang's room and rummaged through the cabinets to find the moon-white Confucian robe. The material was precious and the cloud pattern was of the same color. It's all right, it's just that my skin is too masculine. I can't wear the handsome beauty of a little puppy. If it was my unparalleled beauty from my previous life, I would have been able to wear this kind of clothes. His current appearance lacked a sense of substitution. He took off his bailiff uniform and changed into his little brother's most presentable clothes. A jade pendant of decent quality hung from his belt. Su Qian stood in front of the bronze mirror and looked at himself. It's all right, it's just that my skin is too masculine. I can't wear the handsome beauty of a little puppy. If it was my unparalleled beauty from my previous life, I would have been able to wear this kind of clothes. His current appearance lacked a sense of substitution. Su Qi smoothed out the wrinkles on his chest and left in satisfaction. The structure of the capital could be summarized with the word nesting doll, which was divided into the palace, the imperial city, the inner city, and the outer city. Compared to the outer city, which had a large population, Su Qian understood the inner city as the CBD area in his previous life. Those who could live there were all rich people. In this era, those who could live in the inner city were all people with status. It was worth mentioning that his aunt had always wanted to sell her property in the outer city and move to the inner city. It was a pity that she had a nephew of a metal-devouring beast, which made her yearn for the inner city, but she had no fate to live there. It would take Su Qian 3 to 4 hours to walk from the Su mansion to the gate of the inner city. He hired a carriage and arrived at the nearest inner city gate an hour later. He took out the certificate he had prepared and successfully passed through. The soldiers guarding the city carefully checked the carriage. Seeing that Su Qian did not bring any large luggage, they could not hide their disappointment. This meant that Su Qian was not doing business in the inner city, so he could not collect the city gate tax. The streets in the inner city were wide and crisscrossed. Beautiful houses surrounded by green trees were built on the main road, and all kinds of courtyards were distributed on the non-main road. Whether it was the city's construction, the pedestrians' clothing, or the number of carriages on the streets, they were far better than the outer city. If you have time, you must bring little sister Lingyu to the inner city to play. The prosperity of the inner city cannot be compared to the outer city. Su Qian lifted the curtain of the car window and looked at the bustling scene. Su Lingyu's sharp and beautiful face appeared in his mind. He didn't go to the education workshop immediately. It was still early, and the seafood merchants didn't work during the day. After paying for the carriage, Su Qian wandered aimlessly on the street. Not long after, Su Qian arrived at a market. He looked up at the memorial arch at the end of the street. Yongkang Street. Su Qian had never seen such a wide street before. It was 200 meters wide, and the flat ground was made of bluestone slabs, which extended to the end of his sight. The shops and houses on both sides of the street were lined up in rows. There was no pressure at all even with 10 carriages lined up side by side. The streets were bustling with people. Where was the street? It was clearly a large square. Su Qian, who was standing under the memorial arch, was shocked by this scene. Yongkang Street is one of the main roads in the capital. Second uncle said it was very big, but I didn't expect it to be this big. Su Qian muttered in his heart. The main road being so spacious was a particular rule. When the emperor or the royal family went out, there would be guards to clear the place in advance. The 200-meter width rendered most of the current military crossbows and handguns useless. Even if there were assassins who wanted to hide in the buildings on both sides of the road and shoot, seeing the distance, they could only helplessly leave the keyboard and type a 666. Su Qian was running around Yongkang Street like a wild dog, but because of the limited budget in his pocket, he could not afford to buy anything. Suddenly, a luxurious carriage caught Su Qian's attention. It was so bright that he was blinded. It was a carriage pulled by 4 strong horses. The curved dome was silver and gold painted. The window was hung down with bright yellow satin. Below it was a house wrapped in clear white jade to cover the dust. The sides of the wheels were nailed with a circle of neatly arranged gold nails, and the wheel itself was wrapped in jade. The real essence was the material of the carriage, the golden nanmu used by the royal family. I guess I won't be able to afford a wheel even if I work hard for my entire life, Su Qian thought sadly, as if she had found the feeling of being a social animal in her previous life. The luxurious carriage was parked on the side of the road, and a row of soldiers in black armor and holding long spears guarded the carriage. Interestingly, the other row of soldiers was actually playing a game of pitch-pot. The stall owner was an old Daoist priest in a tattered Daoist robe. His white hair was tied up with a wooden hairpin, and his messy hair hung down. There were copper coins, silver ingots, gold ingots, Daoist scriptures, Bodhi bracelet, jade stone mirror, there were all sorts of things. Not to mention the other things, just the fact that the gold and silver ingots were not snatched away from the stall meant that this old Daoist was not simple. Su Qian stopped and watched. After watching for a while, he understood how the game was played. The pot thrower was 30 steps away from the porcelain pot. He covered his eyes and turned his back to the pot. There were 3 arrows. If one of the arrows hit the target, they would be able to obtain some gold, silver, and jade from the third echelon. If all three teams hit the mark, they could choose any item from the first echelon. The first echelon only had two items, the Bodhi bracelet and the jade mirror. It didn't hit again. How hateful. Go away, it's my turn. The armored soldiers took turns throwing the pot, but all returned in defeat. The pile of broken silver in front of the old deist grew higher and higher. After another round of failure, Su Qian noticed that the curtains of the carriage moved. An armored soldier by the window lowered his head and listened to the story before walking toward the stall owner. Old deist, my master said that he will buy everything in your stall with 60 taels of gold. The soldier walked to the front of the old deist and said in a clear voice. Was this a case of not hitting the target with pitchpot and directly spending money? Su Qian stood not far away, watching this scene. Faced with the temptation of 60 taels of gold, the old deist shook his head. Rules are rules. The soldier tensed up and glared at the old deist for a moment. Then, he turned around and returned to the carriage. A few seconds later, the owner of the carriage called back the armored soldiers and prepared to leave. Su Qian took the opportunity to approach the old deist and asked, Old deist, how much does it cost to play once? The old deist, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, raised his head, glanced at him, and handed over the 3 arrows, 1 silver coin. Su Qian took the arrow and smiled, feeling that victory was in his hands. For a martial artist in the spirit refinement realm, it was not difficult to throw a pot from 30 steps away. However, it was almost impossible to hit the target when the target was turned around and blindfolded. The eyes were the most important part of the 5 senses. Losing one's vision would reduce a martial artist's sense of touch and increase the difficulty of hitting the target. Whether or not he could hit the target depended on his luck. Su Qian's expression was ugly, but he had absolute confidence, because he had not picked up any silver for several days in a row. Is it because I came to the inner city and encountered this game of pitchpot, so my luck is automatically accumulated? If I can hit the target, all the gold and silver ingots will be mine. Sigh. The life of a European king was so simple and boring. Su Qian walked 30 steps away, turned around, covered his eyes with a black cloth, and threw it behind him. Dong dong dong. The 3 arrows were shot into the pot almost at the same time. The surrounding passers-by exclaimed in surprise, and the commotion attracted the attention of those who were about to leave the carriage. A gentle and pleasant voice floated out of the window. Stop the car. In other words, I might not be able to update during the day if I don't have a computer by my side tomorrow. So, I'll update the chapter in advance tomorrow afternoon. This wasn't an additional update, it was an advanced update for tomorrow. Chapter 51. 51 Tea Gathering, 1. Hearing the sound of arrows entering the pot, Su Qian's smile widened uncontrollably. He pulled off the black cloth and pointed at the gold and silver ingots on the stall. Ha ha, old deist, these are all mine. The old deist looked at him and calmly kept the gold and silver ingots into the package. Then, he pointed to the Bodhi bracelet and the small jade mirror at the top and said with a smile. Young master, choose one of the 2. Old Taoist, I don't want these. I only want silver, Su Qian said in a negotiating tone. Rules are rules, the old deist refused ruthlessly. He paused and added, these 2 items are rare treasures. They can't be compared to common items. Young master, don't be blinded by gold and silver. No, I just want these mortal things' treasure. Su Qian asked. What's the use? I don't know. I only know that they are waiting for the fated one. The old deist looked like a bachelor. Su Qian suspected that the old deist was lying to him, but he had no evidence. Considering his inexplicable luck, he was a little hesitant. Who could say for sure whether it was a treasure or not? Silver was more practical. At this moment, an armored soldier walked over and said, Young master, my master would like to ask for your help. Su Qian turned around and looked at the luxurious carriage not far away. What does your master want? That string of Bodhi beads. The armored soldier's gaze moved away from the stall and looked at Su Qian. My master is willing to pay 60 taels of gold. So this is where my lucky charm should be. Su Qian showed a kind smile. Thank you for your kindness, deal. He asked the soldier to fork out a coin of silver in exchange for 3 arrows. Master said that you can throw in a few more times, and we'll pay for all the silver, the soldier said. It doesn't matter if I fail. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Su Qian, who had his eyes covered, throw an arrow. Thump thump thump, the 3 arrows were accurately shot into the pot. The passerby's exclamations came again. The soldier looked at Su Qian with respect. If once was luck, twice meant that the other party was not an ordinary person. This ordinary-looking young man was dressed like a scholar, but he was definitely an expert. 60 taels of gold in hand. Su Qian was extremely happy. He pulled off the black cloth and happened to see the curtain of the luxurious carriage in the distance fall down. He wondered who was in the car. He didn't dare to look any longer. He turned around and cupped his fists at the armored soldier. I didn't fail you. The armored soldier respectfully cupped his fist and returned the greeting. Then, he returned to the carriage and came back with a bulging bag of money. Su Qian took the purse and the jade mirror from the old daoist, then watched the carriage leave. He retracted his gaze and casually put the palm-sized jade mirror into his pocket. Then, he happily weighed the bulging money bag. It was about 3 to 4 caddies, too heavy to be tied to the waist. No, I have to go and exchange it for silver notes. It's too stupid to carry such heavy gold around. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look back, but he found that the old Taoist was gone, and the stall was cleaned up. Su Qian stood by the roadside and was silent for a long time. 480 silver taels was more than enough to slap his aunt's pretty face. Why did she have to slap her aunt with silver notes every time she earned money? The original owner's resentment towards her aunt was too strong. In addition, this amount of silver could probably only buy a small courtyard in the inner city. If you want to buy a 3-door mansion, you can't get it without 10,000 taels of silver. He then went to the bank and exchanged the gold for 4 notes worth 100 taels. 1 note was worth 50 taels, and 3 were worth 10 taels. Gold was not part of the currency system, so it had to be exchanged for silver of the same value, and then the bank would issue silver notes. The exchange rate between gold and silver was 1:8, so 60 taels of gold was 480 taels of silver. 480 silver taels was more than enough to slap his aunt's pretty face. Why did she have to slap her aunt with silver notes every time she earned money? The original owner's resentment towards her aunt was too strong. In addition, this amount of silver could probably only buy a small courtyard in the inner city. If you want to buy a 3-door mansion, you can't get it without 10,000 taels of silver. Su Qian was a little vexed. Whether it was in the other world or in his previous life, the price of a house was a matter that made people despair. 480 taels should be enough to redeem a low-grade courtesan from a brothel, but this is not worth it. You see, with 480 taels, I can take turns visiting many courtesans for several months. And to redeem a courtesan, not only would he use up his family's wealth, he would also have to be responsible for her food and clothing. If she got pregnant accidentally, it would be another huge expense. And my current salary is only enough to support 1 wife. I can't afford to live a boring life of a rich man with women on both sides. Besides, I'm not going to redeem the woman from the brothel. I'm using the public car for personal use, and I'll be struck by lightning. At dusk, Su Qian came to the famous teaching workshop in the capital. It was located in an alley. The lights were on, and all kinds of carriages were parked outside the alley. The sound of bamboo strings and strings came from the courtyard, along with a clear and moving singing voice. He knew that the beautiful nightlife had begun. Walking on the roads in the alley, Su Qian recalled the cultural essence he had learned from Constable Wang. A normal brothel was a 2- or 3-story building with 1 or 2 courtyards. The Academy of Public Knowledge didn't have such a high-rise building, because there was no need for it. All the courtyards in this part of the alley were part of the Academy of Public Knowledge. State-owned enterprises were rich and overbearing. There was a threshold to the education workshop. It wasn't a rule that commoners couldn't spend here, but the minimum spending for the education workshop was 5 taels of silver. This wasn't about sleeping with a girl, but the fee for a table. 5 taels of silver was equivalent to several months' income of an ordinary person, and that was if the person was from a well-off family. Thus, there were 3 main types of customers for the Academy's workshop. First, wealthy merchants. This kind of customers were the most willing to spend money because they usually had low social status, and they had a fanatical attachment to sleeping with women of officials. 2. Officials. To them, the Academy Square was a place for tea and gatherings after work. As long as there was a social event, they liked to go there. What was worth mentioning was that the officials of the Ministry of Rights could wear it for free. This was because the education workshop was under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Rights. Third, a scholar. This kind of person was more refined than the rich and powerful. They liked to recite poems and were not as difficult to serve as officials, so they were the most liked by the Miss of the Imperial Academy. There were 3 types of girls in the Academy. 1. Offending the female family of an official. This kind of woman was the most miserable. They were forced to become a prostitute and be bullied. 2. She was a woman who had been captured during the war. For example, in the Battle of Shanhai past 20 years ago, the Western countries and Dauphin were the victors. They captured countless women from the north and south and put them in the imperial training center of the various states and prefectures. 3. The prostitutes recruited by the Imperial Academy. We really learned lot in my life. Constable Wang is my teacher. Su Qian sighed with emotion. He had finally found the purpose of his visit to the Imperial Academy. He stopped outside a courtyard, and the horizontal board on the gate read Yingmei Pavilion. The door to the courtyard was wide open, and 2 bright red lanterns hung from it. Inside the courtyard were plum trees, their branches adorned with flower buds in full bloom. A 16 or 17-year-old young man was guarding the gate of the courtyard. He was looking at Su Qian with a judgmental gaze. He also had another name that everyone was familiar with. I am Yang Ling, a scholar from Changle County. I have long heard of Miss Fu Xiang's name and have come to pay you a visit. Su Qian imitated a scholar's bow and spoke to the gatekeeper politely. The Shadow Plum Pavilion was the residence of the courtesan Fu Xiang. A table here cost 10 taels of silver, twice as much as a normal courtyard. There were a total of 12 courtesans in the education workshop, divided into 4 ranks according to character, charm, talent, and color. Lady Floating Fragrance was a first-class talent and was known for her talent in poetry and zither. 10 taels of silver. The young man at the gate, who was used to seeing the old master, had a cold attitude. After receiving Su Qian's silver, he led him into the courtyard. Su Qian was overjoyed. Laughter and the sound of bamboo could be heard from the courtyard. The tea gathering had already started, but since the young man at the gate allowed him to enter, it meant that the courtyard was not reserved but was for individual guests. There were 2 types of people who came out to play. One was to book the entire place, and the other was to be a casual guest. If it was the former, Su Qian's efforts today would be in vain. Chapter 52. 52. A family should be united. 1. The Yingmei Pavilion hosted guests on the first floor. The door facing the courtyard was open, and a thin silk curtain was hanging down to block the cold wind. More than a dozen guests were sitting in the wine house, drinking, chatting, and admiring the plum blossoms. The 4 corners of the wine house were burning with burning charcoal basins to dispel the cold of winter. A maidservant led Su Qian in. Everyone turned their heads and looked at the tall young man who was wearing a moon-white scholar's robe. Su Qian recalled the rules of the tea house that Constable Wang had told him about. He tried to put on a gentle smile and bowed to the crowd. I am Yang Ling, a scholar from Changle County. Greetings, brothers. Among the people present, there were tyrants in brocade clothes, there were also students from the Imperial College whose status was neither high nor low. Some of them looked away indifferently, some of them sized him up, and some of them smiled back. It seemed that during the investigation in the capital, the officials of Dafeng had been a lot more well behaved. If it was in the past, with Miss Fuxiang's status, this place would definitely be reserved. Su Qian sat down calmly, his eyes glued to the courtesan who was playing the role of Shiju. Her face was full of spring, her eyes were beautiful, her body was colorful, and her spirit was natural. This woman is so nice. Even Su Qian, who had seen countless girls, was stunned. From her facial features alone, this courtesan was on the same level as his aunt, Su Lingyu and Yan Keiwei. They all had their own unique looks. She was the kind of beauty who could definitely make men gasp in surprise and look at her from the side. However, in terms of temperament, this courtesan had the elegance and grace of a lady from a big family. In terms of clothing, she had a chiffon dress that no woman in this era dared to wear. Her shoulders were half exposed, her neck was long, and she was wrapped in a layer of pink tulle, her cleavage faintly visible. There was a reason why she could be the courtesan. Miss Fuxiang took on Shiju's identity, also known as the commanding officer. The commanding officer was in charge of hosting the drinking order, which was the responsibility of maintaining the atmosphere at the banquet. This job was usually done by famous courtesans or courtesans. Ordinary women could not do it because it required a high level of literary cultivation. This time, they were taking turns to speak a couplet, which was a pair. On Su Qian's left was a middle-aged man in a light blue robe with a ring. It happened to be his turn. The middle-aged man raised his cup and pondered for a long time before saying, 1 point, 2 points, 3 points for the cold wine. The courtesan's wife raised the small flag beside her hand and gave a round of comments, flattery, on the first half of the couplet. The smile on the middle-aged man's face widened, and he was quite pleased. This was the reason why Shiju wanted to hire a famous courtesan with a deep literary foundation. Without a certain standard, an ordinary courtesan would not be able to flatter him even if he wanted to. After the comment, the beautiful courtesan's eyes fell on Su Qian. Everyone at the banquet also looked over. I'm not very good at matching couplets. It was difficult to match it neatly. Su Qian's expression did not change, but he was secretly anxious. He looked at the plum tree in the courtyard and had a flash of inspiration. He deliberately drank a cup of wine, put on a carefree and heroic look, and said loudly, "Lilac flowers in the hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands." Excellent. Everyone's eyes lit up. They looked at Su Qian with smiles on their faces. It was acknowledging that he had the qualifications to compete for the top courtesan, treating him as a player of the same level. The floating fragrance courtesan smiled and commented, adulation, on Su Qian's second half as usual. The smile on his face was too professional. He immediately stopped looking at me after giving his evaluation. His sitting posture was a little stiff, and he only drank when he was urged to drink. Su Qian observed the courtesan's body language without a sound. Combined with his knowledge of behavioral psychology, he came to a conclusion: this courtesan's wife doesn't think much of our standards. She had been patiently accompanying him. At this moment, the maidservant brought someone in. He was a handsome young man with fair skin, cool eyes, thin red lips, and delicate facial features. He looked like a man and a woman. Everyone in the room looked at him. Even the floating fragrance flower head revealed a look of surprise. Even she had not seen such a handsome young man often. After the scholarly youth entered the room, he casually swept his gaze and was stunned, frozen on the spot. The corners of Su Qian's eyes twitched, and he finally said, "What a coincidence." The handsome young man's mouth twitched, and he also said, "What a coincidence. You two know each other." The middle-aged man in a light blue robe beside Su Qian asked in surprise. Not only do I know him, he's my little brother. Su Qian suppressed his overwhelming sense of shame and embarrassment and smiled calmly. We've met a few times before. I'm sure brother Su still remembers me. We've met in Changle County. He deliberately gave his surname to remind Su Nian to use a fake name. This was the most basic anti-reconnaissance awareness. Su Nian lacked such awareness, but he was smart and immediately understood his cousin's meaning. He cupped his fists at everyone and said, I'm Su Pinggan, a student from Changle County. After he finished speaking, he sat down under the instructions of the maidservant. Did you mix my name with second uncle's name? Su Qian drank to cover up the anger in his heart. The drinking order continued, and after a moment, the servant led 2 more people in. The one on the left was a handsome young man wearing a sky blue thick robe with a jade pendant hanging from his waist and an oily green jade hairpin tying his hair. The person on the right was tall and sturdy, with a square face and good-looking facial features. He was dressed like a rich man, and his body exuded a fierce aura that was different from that of merchants and students. This tall middle-aged man stepped into the tea room and casually glanced around. He was suddenly stunned and then petrified. Su Qian was speechless. Su Nian was speechless. When the servant realized that the guest was not following them, she turned her head and said gently, Master, this way please. Oh, Su Pingzi braced himself and entered the wine house. Su Nian and Su Qian straightened their backs silently. After second Uncle Su took his seat, the 3 of them tacitly did not look at each other. They maintained a serious sitting posture and looked down. Didn't the 2 rascals say that they didn't have time? It's fine if we part ways. After all, I know a thing or two about his true thoughts. Ning Yan never went to the brothel. Didn't second uncle say that he was on duty tonight? In the past, every time I had a conflict with Ante, he would say that it was a blessing in 8 lifetimes to be able to marry such a beautiful wife in this life, and he was not willing to scold Ante. Didn't he still come out to run away? Didn't big brother never go to the brothel? I was wondering why my robe was missing. Bah, shameless. Didn't father say that he loved his mother deeply and would never go to the brothels? The 3's inner drama was far more colorful than their stiff expressions. Su Qian felt that there was one more embarrassing thing in his life. When she went out for a walk, she met her second uncle and younger brother. Oh my God, I'm also a social death. On second thought, I'm not the only one who died anyway, so I feel much better. The drinking order continued. Su Nian's response was still quite decent. After all, he was a scholar. Su Qian, on the other hand, looked at the situation. Sometimes he couldn't match it, so he had to drink as a punishment. Su Pingzi, on the other hand, was not drinking at all, so he was despised by everyone. Second uncle really didn't know what was going on. You haven't even been to school, what are you doing here? The top courtesan is someone you can sleep with just because you want to? Su Qian complained in his heart. Father is really a waste of money. Su Nian also complained in his heart. The 2 of them were a little anxious because their performance was mediocre and they did not win the favor of the top courtesan. The good-looking Su Nian gradually lost the attention of the top courtesans because he was too formal. The worst thing was that there was a strong competitor on the field, the handsome young man in the sky blue thick robe. He was from the Imperial College and was quite talented. Although he entered the table a little late, he occupied the limelight with his extraordinary talent, making the courtesan's wife cover her mouth and laugh from time to time. The young man in the sky blue robe raised his wine cup, took a sip, and said in a clear voice, "This time, there's no harm in letting this one take the lead." No one had any objections. Floating Fragrance courtesan smiled and said, "Young Master Zhao, please." Young Master Zhao looked around and said, "Pine leaf, bamboo leaf, green leaf." It's actually a double word couplet. Someone at the table was shocked. Pine leaf, bamboo leaf, green leaf, amazing, amazing, I'm ashamed of my inferiority. Brother Zhao is a great talent, as expected of a scholar from the Imperial College. After a round of fighting, none of them could actually match up. Young Master Zhao had a faint smile on his face, his expression haughty. Lady Floating Fragrance's eyes sparkled as she gazed at young Master Zhao. Judging from her expression and subtle movements, Hua Kui had a good impression of this Zhao and admired his talent. Su Qian frowned and turned to look at Su Nian. The latter happened to look over, and the two brothers had worried expressions on their faces. Originally, according to Su New Year's meaning, his big brother, who was good at poetry, should be like a fish in water in the Imperial Academy. However, after half a day, he played drinking games and couplets, but there was no poem. In fact, in the Imperial Academy, poetry had always been lukewarm. In the past 200 years, there were few excellent poems, and scholars were not good at writing poems. When they were having a tea party, they would naturally avoid those they were not good at. However, the quality of the guests present tonight was uneven. It was a little difficult to match couplets. The Floating Fragrance Flower Chief had a pure heart and spirit, so she deliberately did not mention poems to avoid embarrassment for the guests. At this moment, the Floating Fragrance courtesan stood up gracefully, curtsied, and said softly, "This little girl is a little tired, so I will take my leave first. Please enjoy your drinks." The tea gathering was over. Next, if the courtesan's wife took a fancy to someone, she would ask the maidservant to keep them and lead them into the house. If they didn't, the maidservant would send them off and start the next round of tea gathering. Everyone waited with anticipation and apprehension. Time passed bit by bit, and after half an incense stick of time, a maidservant walked over and said in a tender voice, "My wife invites young Master Zhao into the house for tea." The guests shook their heads and sighed. There were also people who smiled and congratulated young Master Zhao. Young Master Zhao had a smile on his face, as if he was a winner. This time, the three men of the Su family could no longer sit still. Chapter 53. 53 I copied the poem for a deal, not for vulgar posturing. 1. What should we do? We've lost 30 taels of silver for the three of us. Even if we find the maidservants in this courtyard to sleep with us, the three of us will still need a few taels. Second, Uncle Su was anxious. He felt like he had returned to the moment before liberation. He frowned and looked at his son. Farewell, quickly think of a way. Was this a matter of money? This was a matter of not getting any information. The two brothers were cursing madly in their hearts. Su Nian looked at his father. What can I do? We were just trying our luck. It's fine that my brother and I came. Don't you know your place, father? His tone was a little heavy, indicating that he was also anxious. This was a huge loss. The silver was secondary, the key was that they did not manage to get any information. Su Qian looked at young Master Zhao, who was being led away by the servant, and suddenly remembered the title of the Floating Fragrance courtesan. Belle, the zither and poem were both excellent. He immediately asked for a brush, ink, and rice paper from the servant girl who served the guests. She cleared a space on the table and pulled Su Xinyi over. Farewell, write it for me. Su Nian didn't hesitate. He tacitly straightened his sitting posture and held his pen. Su Qian spoke quickly and read, all the beauties shake off Du Jinjian, and occupy the little garden. Su Nian's brush was flying, and he wrote a unique cursive script. Su Qian continued to read, the water is clear, and the moon is at dusk. Su Nian didn't start writing. He was stunned and petrified. He kept repeating the last two sentences. Quickly write. Su Qian pushed him. Su Erlang seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly finished writing with a straight face. Su Qian pulled away the paper and called for the maidservant. Pass this poem to Lady Fu Xiang and go do it. Tell her I'll be waiting here. The maidservant was not very happy, but after Su Qian gave her a handful of silver pieces, She immediately ran away. In the master bedroom, 4 folding screens blocked the bath barrel, and steam curled up on the roof beams. Fu Xiang was soaked in hot water with floating rose petals. Her black hair was tied up, her neck was white and slender, and beads of water hung on her shoulders and chest, reflecting the light of the candle light. Her skin was as smooth as grease and she looked like a jade person. A personal maidservant was serving by the bathtub, praising Fu Xiang's skin while saying, "Young Master Zhao is already waiting in the tea room next door." The guest outside said that he is a scholar from the Imperial College. What's so strange about being an elementary scholar? Fu Xiang smiled and gently stirred the water. However, with young Master Zhao's talent, passing the examination would not be a problem. The maidservant laughed in a low voice and said, "I knew that wifey liked this kind of talented young master. Like that annoying Jolie. He still uses his father's official position to show off his power. That young Master Zhao is very talented, I hope that wifey will entertain him well, maybe it will become a good story in the future. Women can also leave their names in history. Even I'm laughing at you." Fu Xiang poked the servant girl's head with her finger and sighed. How difficult is it for a woman to leave her name in history? It's something that many scholars can't even dream of. The door of the master bedroom was pushed open and a maidservant came in. She stood in the hall and said in a crisp voice, "Wifey, the guest surnamed Yang outside asked the servant to send a poem over." Fu Xiang frowned, and the maidservant rebuked, "Such an unruly thing, wifey has already chosen young Master Zhao, how can it be changed? Is it because you have received some benefits from others?" The little maidservant lowered her head, not daring to talk back. "Leave it on the table. Go out and tell the guests that I appreciate it," Fu Xiang said indifferently. The little maidservant was relieved. She sighed, put the rice paper on the table, and went out. After her bath, Fu Xiang put on a thin chiffon dress, and her graceful figure was faintly discernible. She came to the table and sat down with her bare white feet. "Go and invite young Master Zhao in." As she spoke, her gaze fell on the rice paper on the table and she picked it up. Her gaze suddenly froze as she looked at the rice paper in a daze. Yingmei Pavilion offers floating incense. All the beauties shook off Du Jinjian, occupying the little garden. The water was clear and shallow, and the fragrance floated in the moonlight. The servant girl walked to the door and was about to open it to invite young Master Zhao in when she suddenly heard her wife's sharp voice from behind, "Hold on." Looking back, his wife's hand was tightly holding the rice paper, slightly trembling. Her face had never been so strange. The servant girl had never seen such an expression on her face. The courtesan's lady's voice was urgent and sharp. Who sent the poem? Which young master, tell me quickly." "I think his surname is Yang." The maidservant was shocked and said awkwardly. The courtesan's wife rushed to the door without a care. Wifey, how can you go out like this?" "I can't." The maidservant hugged him tightly. Let me go, let me go." Fu Xiang's face and ears were red with anxiety. "Don't let that young master leave. Quickly chase him back." The servant girl couldn't understand how a poem could make her wife lose her composure like never before. She completely ignored her usual scholarly, cultured, and elegant self. "Wifey, don't be impatient. This servant will immediately go and invite the young master who wrote the poem." After the maidservant left, the courtesan's wife sat at the table in a daze, her clothes disheveled. She looked at the paper in her hand in a daze. "The water is clear and shallow, and the fragrance is floating in the evening. Give me floating incense, give me floating incense." Bean-sized tears rolled down her pretty face, and she leaned on the table and started crying. In the front hall, some of the guests had left, but the others did not. After the tea gathering, the guests who failed to make the cut had two choices: one, go to another courtyard to continue the next match. Second, if you can't drink and are tired, you can choose the maidservants here to serve you. This lady floating fragrance doesn't buy your words. Su Pingzi looked at his nephew with anxiety in his eyes. The poem was sent over, but in exchange, it was a light sentence. Obviously, Su Qian's poem did not move the courtesan. She's just a woman. How can she understand the essence of poetry? Su Nian sneered. Su Pingzi stared at his son and asked, was Ning Yan's poem excellent? The proud and arrogant Su Erlang was completely convinced by his big brother in the Dao of poetry. He sighed, excellent, excellent. Su Dalin was also confused, but he had absolute confidence in this poem. This seven law was very famous, very famous. Especially the last two lines, which were praised as the pinnacle of plum singing. At that time, under the lonely frost, two lines of poetry became famous. These two lines were the examples. Two lines of poetry became an ancient name. What a high evaluation. Dark fragrance and sparse shadow had even become the names of these poems. One could see the status of this poem among the ancient scholars. Wang Xiu, Sima Guang, and other famous people had given high evaluations to these two lines. And the author of this seven-tone poem had also left his name in history. Well, Su Qian had forgotten who the author was. That's impossible. She has no reason to reject me. If I were to gift this poem to the two great Confucians of Yunlu Academy, they would definitely treat me like their own son. Su Qian thought of a possibility. This courtesan, who was known to be a master of poetry and zither, was actually just for show. He was just trying to boost his reputation and sell his image. In essence, he was an uncultured person. However, there was a paradox here. If the floating fragrance courtesan Belle was a flower vase that sold her image, she would not be recognized by the scholars. Compared to the artists in his previous life who hyped up their image, the top courtesans of this era also had similar operations, but the latter had real ability. The reason was simple. The scholars in ancient times were not as easy to fool as the young people in the future. As Fu Xiang's brows furrowed, the maidservant who served by her side walked over. Her eyes were filled with anxiety as she searched the crowd. When she saw Su Qian, her expression relaxed. She walked over and bowed. Young Master Yang, was this poem written by you? The three masters of the Su family looked at each other, relieved. It's me, he said. Su Qian nodded. The maidservant smiled and became more respectful. She lowered her eyes and said gently, my wife would like to invite you. Su Qian nodded calmly and followed the maidservant to the master bedroom on the other side of the attic. This scene attracted the attention of the guests who were planning to stay at the Yingmei Pavilion, and they started whispering to each other. Why is he following us in? This it's against the rules. How can two people enter? That servant girl seemed to have mentioned a poem, and I happened to see him writing something with that handsome young man. A middle-aged man dressed like a rich man walked up to Su Nian and Su Pingzi. He cupped his hands and said, the two of you, may I know what lady floating fragrance means? Why did that brother go in just now? What poem did you write? P.S. Guys, my face is so itchy. I need recommendation votes to slap my face fiercely. Chapter 54. Chapter 54 Cutting off the beard, 1. Su Erlang was silent. Su Pingzi stared at the middle-aged man and shook his head. It was just a limerick. I heard that the young master said that his calligraphy is rusty and he can't write well, so I asked this young master to help me write it. Second, Uncle Su was an experienced man. He acted like a bystander and drew a clear line between him and his nephew and son. Everyone immediately looked at Su Nian. Su Erlang snorted coldly and didn't bother to answer them. His attitude made the middle-aged man who asked the question feel angry and embarrassed, and he returned to his original position. Su Pingzi, who had originally wanted to stay the night, secretly gave his son a look, and the two of them left the Yingmei Pavilion one after another. It's not good to stay in there. It won't be good if people find out that the three of us have a relationship. Su Pingzi was teaching his son. I understand, Su Nian nodded and shivered in the cold wind. There was a charcoal fire in the house to keep warm, and once it came out, the temperature difference was huge, making people shiver. Su Pingzi looked at his son and said, "If we were to stay in the small pavilion of Yingmei, those servants 1 tael of silver would be enough. I can only go to the courtyard to find other women now. If you're not a maid, the base price is 5 taels of silver, including the money for the tea stall." At this point, Su Pingzi paused. He saw that his son didn't ask him why he knew so much. While he found it strange, he also heaved a sigh of relief. Second Uncle Su took out an ingot of official silver from his pocket. It was standard silver, and each ingot was 5 taels. "Erlang, you can take the silver." The Su family had gone bankrupt because of the tax money case. Even though a month had passed and Su Pingzi had managed to get some silver through shady channels, they were still relatively short of money. Second Uncle Su didn't think that his son would be able to take out 5 taels of silver. Su Nian was slightly moved and said in a low voice, "Father, what about you?" Second Uncle Su smiled nonchalantly and said, "When father was in the essence refinement realm, he was not afraid of the cold or the heat. Even if he slept by the roadside for a night, it would not be a problem. Your body can't stand the cold wind at night." Su Nianyan's hands were hidden in his sleeves, and his back was slightly bent. He endured the cold night wind and stared at the 5 taels of silver in a daze. After a while, he said in a hoarse voice, "I don't want to." Second Uncle Su insisted that his son accept it. Between the pulling and pulling, with a clatter, an official silver ingot fell out of Su Nianzhen's pocket. It was exactly 5 taels. The father and son looked at the silver on the ground and fell into silence. On the other side, the servant girl pushed open the door of the master bedroom and motioned for Su Qian to enter, but she did not intend to go in. "Young Master Yang, please enter." The moment the barrier door opened, a warm fragrance hit his face. The ground was covered with an expensive silk robe. Not only was it expensive, but it also consumed a lot of manpower. The robe was embroidered with green lotus flowers and auspicious clouds. The woman walked on it, each step like a lotus. The official walked on it, and it was a meteoric rise. She was very thoughtful. A triple-layered screen that was a copy of the famous painting of rain hitting the banana leaves separated the sleeping area and the brocade hall. A beautiful young woman knelt on a small bed in front of the screen, and a phoenix-tailed zither was placed on the small bed. She was wearing a thin chiffon dress, and her jade-like skin was faintly visible. She was looking at the door with a smile. Their eyes met, and she lowered her head slightly, a shy smile on her lips. The gentleness when she lowered her head was like the shyness of a lotus flower that could not stand the cold wind. This line appeared in Su Qian's mind. When drinking, she was as elegant as a lady from a noble family, but when she was by the side of the bed, she was charming and seductive. This was a bewitching technique that only the women of the Imperial Academy could cultivate. Su Qian had 2 heads, one big. "Young master. Why are you looking at me like that, young master?" Hua Kui laughed foolishly. Su Qian sighed. "I've long heard that Miss Fu Xiang is a rare beauty. I didn't believe it before, but now I do. Even if you say that Lady Floating Fragrance is the #1 beauty in the world, I would believe you. Young Master Yang, please don't make fun of this servant." Fu Xiang pursed her lips and lowered her head shyly. Her eyes were full of smiles, clearly very happy. In the tea room next door, young Master Zhao drank an entire pot of tea. His bladder protested twice, and on the 3rd time, he finally couldn't take it anymore. Was he here to drink tea? Young Master Zhao left the tea house with a belly full of complaints and walked towards the master bedroom. However, he was stopped by a maidservant at the door. "I've been waiting in the tea room for a long time, why hasn't Miss Fuxiang seen me yet?" Young Master Zhao questioned the maidservant. "Young Master Zhao, please don't blame me. Wifey has already chosen someone else." The servant girl replied. Young Master Zhao felt as if his head was struck by lightning, and he was filled with anger as he shouted. Lady Fu Xiang has clearly chosen me, so why did you suddenly change your mind? Are you just making fun of me? If you don't give me an explanation, don't blame this young master for being impolite. His fierce tone and sinister words made the maidservant a little scared, and she subconsciously wanted to call for the servants in the courtyard. Ping Er, since young Master Zhao isn't convinced, you can take she out and let him see. The courtesan's charming voice came from inside the house. The maidservant cautiously looked at young Master Zhao, then opened the door to a gap that could only allow one person to pass through, and flashed in. A few seconds later, she flashed out again and handed the paper to young Master Zhao. The latter took it and glanced at it. The angry expression on his face froze and slowly melted away. It was replaced by shock, and disbelief. He stood there for a long time before he loosened his fingers and the paper fell to the ground. The guests outside were shocked to find that young Master Zhao had actually come out. Finished. Young Master Zhao's expression made them realize that something was wrong. He had been chased out. Brother Zhao, what's wrong with you? A young man of the same age, dressed like a scholar, immediately stepped forward. He looked concerned, but was actually gossiping. Not long after the maidservant had called that young guy away, young Master Zhao came out in a daze. It was obvious that someone had stolen the peony flower. Young Master Zhao, who was wearing a green robe, slowly scanned the crowd and muttered, "I lost. I'm convinced of my loss." "What happened, lost? Where did you start?" "Brother Zhao, that person wrote a poem, right? What kind of poem could make Lady Floating Fragrance break the rules? Hurry up and tell me, I'm so anxious." The customers all gathered around. Young Master Zhao acted as if he didn't hear anything, and as he walked out, he muttered, "All the beauties shake down Du Suyan." Everyone's hearts trembled, knowing that he was reciting the poem just now. Full of amorous feelings towards the little garden. At this moment, young Master Zhao had already walked into the courtyard. The guests couldn't help but follow behind him and listen. The water is clear and shallow, and the fragrance is floating in the evening. The customers didn't follow and stayed where they were. The air fell into a brief silence. For a long time, no one spoke. After an unknown period of time, a student's eyes were filled with tears, and his lips trembled. Once this poem is out, it will embarrass all those who sing about plum blossoms for thousands of years. Everyone, this little one will take his leave first, this little one will go to other places to have tea and spread the poem. This one will also take his leave. How can I miss out on making a name for myself in the poetry world? The guests dispersed in a hubbub, and they couldn't wait to participate in the tea competition in the courtyard. Then, they would throw out this poem to amaze the world. Chapter 55. 55 The Initial Plan, 1. This servant must thank young master. If this servant's name goes down in history in the future, it will definitely be young master's credit. Fu Xiang's eyes were filled with love, making her even more charming. Su Qian knew what she was referring to. Since ancient times, there had been many famous courtesans who had been famous for their poems. Any prostitute would be overjoyed by this opportunity. There were two kinds of people in the world who liked to fight for fame, scholars and prostitutes. What I want is your deep gratitude. Su Qian smiled, showing an appropriate frivolity. How are you going to thank me? It was as warm as spring in the room. He had drunk a lot of wine, and after sitting for a while, he already felt unbearably hot. He took off his outer robe and placed it on the round stool. Fu Xiang bit her luscious lips and shyly said, "Young master, the night is long. Why don't you listen to me play a song to liven up your mood?" Su Qian was stunned. She knew that the other party had misunderstood her. She smiled but did not explain. Women from ancient times were still the most elegant. If you slept with her, she would say, Don't worry, let this little girl play a song for you. Unlike the girl who came later, if you slept with her, she would say, hurry up. After patiently listening to the song, Su Qian had to admit that this courtesan had some skills. She was good at both the zither and poetry. He didn't know about poetry, but she played the zither really well. Even someone like him, who didn't know music, could calm down and immerse himself in it. Su Qian took a sip of tea to relieve the dryness in her throat caused by the alcohol. She started a topic in a casual tone, Miss Fuxiang is a peerless beauty, could it be that no one has redeemed you? This was obviously not a very pleasant topic. The courtesan's wife sighed dejectedly. How can a girl from the academy workshop be redeemed just because she wants to? Even if you meet a man you love, the Ministry of Rights will not agree. In fact, it was too expensive. It was very difficult for the Imperial Academy's courtesan to redeem herself. Because she was an official courtesan, she had to go through a lot of procedures and bribe people from top to bottom. The money spent was far more than that of other courtesans in brothels. I remember that Constable Wang said that the most popular courtesan in a normal brothel is worth about 500 to 1,000 taels. The number of courtesans in the education workshop might even double or more. What was the concept of 2,000 taels? I have to save up for 10 years without eating or drinking, and this is already an above-average income with so much money. Wouldn't it be better for me to buy a few pretty concubines? Su Qian subconsciously calculated in his heart and came to a conclusion. This business deal was a huge loss. That's true. With Lady Fuxiang's beauty, there's no one else in the entire Great Feng capital who can match her. Su Qian flattered. The courtesan's wife chuckled, her heart filled with joy, but she said, young master, don't make fun of me. The number one beauty in the capital is the Princess of Zhenbei. I'm just a willow leaf. She had changed from a servant to a family, and their relationship had become closer. Her tone was also a little coquettish. The Princess of Zhenbei? This woman again. Once again, Su Qian heard about the legendary beauty of the capital. In his past life, he had seen countless beauties. Now that he had seen Su Lingyu, Yan Keiwei, and other almost flawless beauties, he could not imagine how beautiful this princess consort was to be able to hold the title of the capital's number one beauty. It was most likely an identity halo, he thought. That Wang Fei was born in a scholarly family in Jiangnan. When she was 9, she followed her parents to the Jade Buddha temple to burn incense. His appearance shocked everyone, and his grace overwhelmed Mu Yang. Tens of thousands of people admired the beauty of the country, and the soul of the human world provoked the emperor. From then on, he became famous and was sent to the imperial palace when he was 13. Then how did she become a princess? Su Qian asked curiously. Fuxiang Huakuei stretched out her slender hand from her long sleeve, picked up the porcelain bottle with her orchid-like fingers, and poured out the zither paste. While maintaining the phoenix tail zither, she said. 19 years ago, when the Shanhai Pass battle was won, the king of Zhenbei was the second hero. The emperor gave him the most beautiful woman in the capital. The north vanquishing prince was the younger brother of the current emperor. It was not strange for him to reward a beauty. After all, the beauty was indeed very talented, but the current emperor had devoted himself to cultivation and had long stopped being close to women. Su Qian was curious about another thing. Who's the biggest contributor? Duke of Wei. Back then, he was the commander of the 3 armies. If he wasn't a eunuch, the princess consort wouldn't be the princess consort. Fuxiang smiled. What I've said to young master is something that cannot be concealed from others. It's just that once we're out of this door, there's no need to talk too much. As for the matter of Lord Wei, it was fine if ordinary people talked about it. After all, she was a receptionist working in a state-owned enterprise. So it was him. Su Qian suddenly understood. Su Dalin had heard of Wei Yuan before. He was too famous. Although he was a eunuch, he was extremely talented. He could rule a country with his literary skills and quell chaos with his martial skills. If he wasn't a eunuch, it would be easy for him to become the top scholar or the first assistant. The two of them chatted on and off. Su Qian was well versed in the art of patient persuasion. This was a skill that she had honed from her hard work in interrogation. After going around in circles for a long time, he finally changed the topic to Jolie. This person is preposterous and lecherous. He's not well educated. I don't like him. Every time he participates in the tea gathering, I'll pretend he doesn't exist. Fu Xiang said angrily. The education workshop is under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Rights. He's just the son of the Assistant Minister of Revenue, so I won't be afraid of him. Su Qian showed some curiosity and asked with a smile, how can you say that he's lecherous and absurd? Isn't it normal to look for women? The courtesan's wife hesitated for a moment and said softly, I only know a little about it from other officials. If young Master Yang wants to know, I can tell you, but please don't tell others. She sounded like she was begging. Su Qian pretended to be flattered and expressed that he was only interested in it for a while and would not tell anyone. This matter has to start from last year's Lantern Festival. That Jolie was a ridiculous person. He took a fancy to a young lady during the Lantern Festival and took advantage of the crowd to molest her. He also had people injure the female attendant by the side of the lady. Who would have thought that the young lady also had a strong background, being the Wei Wu Marquis' Shu daughter? Originally, if it was just a concubine's daughter, it would not be troublesome. But the problem was that the birth mother of the concubine's daughter was the biological sister of the Wei Wu Marquis' first wife. With this layer of blood relation, that Shu daughter is liked by the mistress and the treatment is not much different from the Di daughter. It's just lacking a title. How did you deal with it? Su Qian clenched his fist. The mighty Marquis filed an imperial complaint and the Assistant Minister of Revenue wrote an explanation. The two sides wrangled for many days before the emperor finally ruled Assistant Minister Zhou didn't teach his son well, so he was paid a year's salary and compensated the Wei Wu Marquis with 5,000 taels. Jolie will be grounded for 3 months, and if he commits any more crimes, he will be severely punished. If there is a repeat offense, he will be severely punished. The sentence struck Su Qian's mind like lightning, giving him a burst of inspiration. Jolie had coveted the beauty of the mighty Marquis' Shu daughter for a long time. Because he had suffered a loss a while ago and was beaten up, he was in a depressed mood. In his hot-headed state, he had the idea of having the mighty Marquis' Shu daughter again. The information he had gathered about Jolie was instantly summarized. It was like a cornerstone that added bricks and tiles to his plan. Therefore, he sent people to abduct the daughter of the mighty Marquis and hid her in a private house outside, planning to have sex after that. He would kill them to silence them. Well, this was very reasonable. Of course, my purpose is to frame her. I don't have to kill an innocent girl. This is the first draft of the current plan. I still have to discuss the details with Erlang. It must be natural and reasonable. Seeing that Su Qian was in a daze, the courtesan's wife called out to him. She pouted her pink lips and complained. Young master, are you going to sit with me for the whole night? I can't lose my virginity. If I don't sit for the whole night, am I supposed to do it for the whole night? In addition, there were some problems with the recent updates. I didn't have time to update in the afternoon. I'll start to restore it tomorrow. Chapter 56. 56 Chapter 56 The core of the plan, thanks to the leader of Salted Fish doesn't want to talk big boss, _1. The maidservants had boiled water, and Su Qian took a bath with their little hands. When he took off his clothes piece by piece, what was revealed to the two maidservants was a tall, healthy, and masculine body. The lines of his muscles were smooth, full, and contained strength. He exuded the charm of a strong man. He had served many high-ranking officials in their baths. Some had big bellies, some were thin, and some were muscular. Young Master Yang's well-proportioned, fit, and explosive body was something they had rarely seen. This was the power granted by the peak of the spirit refinement realm. The body was in the most suitable state for combat, without any excess flesh, and the flexibility of the muscles would not be affected by the expansion of muscles. When Su Qian came to the bed with only a pair of underwear on and a bare upper body, the courtesan, who was sitting on the couch in a light gauze coat, suddenly had a blurred vision and stared at Su Qian's pectoral and abdominal muscles. The maidservants left the master bedroom. Su Qian lifted the quilt embroidered with mandarin ducks. As soon as he got in, Fu Xiang came over and wrapped her arms around his neck. Her plump and soft body hung on him. She breathed into Su Qian's ear and said in a sweet voice, "My lord." A delicate fragrance entered his nose. Su Qian, who was an honest man who never seduced women, had a serious expression on his face and his body tensed. The courtesan's wife was surprised for a moment, then laughed in a daze. Could it be that young master is still a virgin? Her body softened at the thought of this possibility. "No, I've also experienced women in my previous life, it's just that I've never slept with such a stunning beauty like you, Miss Fuxiang. Have you ever heard of a divine skill?" Su Qian asked. "What godly skill? I'll be able to sleep soundly in 3 seconds. He, I don't believe you. Then stay away from me, I'll show you." The courtesan's wife smiled and moved back, thinking that he was just playing around. After 3 seconds. "Hulu, Hulu." Fu Xiang nudged him, "Young Master Yang." "Hulu Hulu." Fu Xiang. At night, Su Qian woke up with a start. After a silent sigh, she heard the long breathing beside her. Her soft and silky body, he forced himself to sleep again with great determination. The next day, at 5 o'clock, Su Qian's biological clock naturally woke up. He felt that there was something heavy on his body. He opened his eyes and saw Hua Kui sleeping next to him. A long, white leg was on his waist, and a white arm was on his chest. Su Qian carefully removed her hands and feet, got out of bed, and quickly put on his clothes. When he was tidying his clothes, he was angry to find that the silver notes in his wallet were gone. There was only a small, exquisite jade mirror the size of a palm left in the money bag. Su Qian's first thought was that the servant girl in the Yingmei pavilion had stolen the silver notes while he was asleep. It was not impossible. Yang Ling was only a scholar, and even though his status in society was not low, fake, what kind of place was the Imperial Workshop? It was an official brothel, and he had the support of the Ministry of Rights. He was just a scholar. What could Su Qian do when he was beaten to death and refused to admit that he had stolen the money? The Education Workshop didn't care about reputation. The Education Workshop didn't care about their reputation, but Miss Floating Fragrance did. If this matter were to spread, which customer would dare to come to her place to spend money? Su Qian judged that the courtesan's wife should not have known about it. It was the maidservant who had been tempted by the money and could not resist the temptation of the silver notes. He was upset that he was careless and did not take good care of the silver notes as he walked to the bed, intending to push Fu Xiang awake. However, at this moment, Su Qian glanced at the mirror, and his face suddenly froze. On the originally clean jade mirror, there seemed to be something else. Looking closely, it was a few silver notes. The lines were light, like a painting carved in a mirror. What? Su Qian's mind was full of question marks. How did my silver get into the mirror? This is my hard-earned money, spit it out, or I'll smash you. He held the small jade mirror and shook it hard, making it look like it was falling. Voila! The banknote appeared out of thin air and floated in the air for a moment before slowly landing on the ground. In the quiet room, Su Qian held the mirror and didn't speak for a long time. So, this mirror was really a treasure? Was it my luck, or did the deist give me the mirror on purpose? If it's the latter, then what's his purpose? Why did he give me the treasure and discover my inexplicable luck? How is this possible? Even the Si Tianjian, who is proficient in the Qi observation technique, Cai Wei, did not notice my uniqueness. Daoist priest, I'm completely unfamiliar with the Daoist system. After a long while, he sucked in a cold breath. This inexplicable gift made people feel uneasy. He had to pick up the silver notes first. Su Qian hid the jade mirror in her bosom and kept the silver notes in her purse, keeping them separately. Then, he left the room quietly and enjoyed his breakfast with the help of his maidservants. "Won't young master wait for wifey to wake up?" the maidservant asked. Usually, when a guest got up, the wife who served him would also get up, but this guest was a little strange. He actually sneaked out alone. "No, there's no need. I'm afraid she'll scold me for being worse than a beast. I have something urgent to attend to," Su Qian said calmly. A few hours later, at the Su residence, Su Nian and Su Siju were sitting in the study with hot tea in their hands. Su Pingzi was full of energy. Su Erlang looked a little dispirited. The father and son did not speak, tacitly not mentioning what had happened last night, as if no one had been to the Imperial Academy. The silent atmosphere was a little stiff until Su Qian's arrival broke the awkward atmosphere between the father and son. "Why did you take so long to take a bath as soon as you came back? Can't you take a bath in the academy?" Second Uncle Su raised his eyebrows and complained. Su Nian coughed. He didn't want to hear his father talk about the education workshop anymore. He said, "Any gains?" Second Uncle Su immediately stopped complaining and put on a listening posture. Su Qian told them about the news he had received from Fu Xiang and his plan. "The core of this question is, how did you abduct the daughter of the Weiwo Marquis?" Su Nian went straight to the point. "If we can't solve this problem, this plan will never succeed." Second Uncle Su pondered and said, "First, send someone to keep an eye on her. Then, find an opportunity to make a move. The daughter of the Weiwo Marquis will definitely have retinue following her when she goes out. However, there won't be too many. After all, she is not the daughter of the first wife. We can create chaos and then take the opportunity to kidnap them." Su Qian and his brother listened. In terms of experience in handling affairs, Second Uncle Su had more say. "But if we do it in the day, it'll be very difficult to kidnap her in front of everyone. Once we provoke the royal sword guards, we'll be the ones suffering the consequences. And at night, with just the two of us, it's impossible for us to barge into the Marquis residence. What if I can solve this problem?" Su Qian smiled mysteriously. In the front hall of the Su residence, old Zhang, the gatekeeper, was passing by the Floerbede when he found a servant unconscious in the garden. He went up to check in a panic and found that he had only fainted. "Why are you unconscious here?" Old Zhang shook him awake and asked. The servant was at a loss for a moment. He seemed to remember who he was and where he was. In the face of old Zhang's inquiry, he scratched his head. "I was boiling water for eldest brother just now. He was taking bath in the house when eldest brother suddenly called me in. I can't remember after that." Old Zhang examined the servant for a moment. "How do you feel?" "My head hurts a little." "Does your butt hurt?" "It doesn't hurt." Old Zhang and the servant looked at each other, relieved. In the Directorate of Celestials, Songqing, whose dark circles were getting more and more serious, was lying on the table, on which there were bottles and cans of messy objects. He didn't do any alchemy experiments today. Instead, he threw himself at the table and wrote at a high speed. Why are the fruits better after grafting? What profound laws of heaven and earth were involved in this? If the grafted thing is indeed better, then I will graft the man and the horse together, and De Feng will not have to worry about the lack of war horses. Every soldier is a horse. They can run long distances and fight bravely. This will improve the combat ability of the Great Feng army. The more he wrote, the more excited he became, and his entire person was glowing. At this moment, a white-robed man came in and shouted excitedly, Senior brother Song, Su Qian, the genius of gold cultivation, is here. He wants to see you. The genius of alchemy was what the white-robed Directorate of Celestials called Su Qian. Chapter 57. 57 Kidnapping, 1. Su Qian received a warm welcome from Song Cheng. The two of them sat at the table, holding fragrant tea and having a friendly conversation. To be honest, I'm a little suspicious of you, Song Cheng spat and said. I've checked all 18 generations of your family over the past few days. Was it really appropriate to say in front of him that he had investigated his 18 generations of ancestors? Su Qian was not surprised. He smiled and asked, how's the investigation? It's too clean. Song Cheng shook his head and didn't continue on this topic. He took out a stack of rice paper and handed it over. I'll show you my recent research. Su Qian thought to himself, I've already made up a story about the Wandering Master, but you're not asking. You tech geeks don't care about these things at all. He took the manuscript, glanced at it, and almost spat out the tea in his mouth. In addition to the theory of plant grafting that he told Song Cheng, this fellow also drew inferences and made several cases with his divergent thoughts. For example, man and horse grafting. There were many advantages. For example, De Feng would no longer need to consider the resources of war horses, and the soldiers would not have to worry about not having good war horses. Because we are mature soldiers, we can be war horses ourselves. Another example was to capture bird-type demons and breed them with humans, creating half-demons that could act as air forces. Devil Lady, please understand reproductive isolation. Su Qian put down the paper and calmed down. He said, I've come to the Directorate of Celestials to ask for Senior Brother Song's help. Just say it. You should know that I have offended Assistant Minister Zhou. Wei told me. Song Cheng put down his teacup and said sternly, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. The Directorate of Celestials doesn't interfere in court politics. His Majesty doesn't allow it. Besides, an assistant minister with real power is already beyond my ability. Senior Brother Song, don't worry. What I need you to do is simple. Su Qian shared his idea. That's impossible, Song Cheng rejected directly. I'm an upright and honest man, I would never do such a thing. Su Qian thought for a while and said guiltily, I didn't think it through. Senior Brother Song, let's continue talking about your grafting theory. With all due respect, it's impossible to succeed. Song Cheng frowned and sat up straight, adopting a serious attitude of an academic discussion. I'm sure you know what you're doing. The cat that must be kept in the glass bottle is an example. However, you must be confused as to why you failed and what the reason was. Song Cheng leaned forward and his breathing became rapid. He stared at Su Qian with his eyes wide open. You know about it? I didn't participate in the research, Su Qian said. I don't know what the real reason is, but I can provide you with a theoretical basis. Theoretical basis? What Song Cheng lacked the most was theoretical basis. After all, a Grand Master who founded a sect was rare, and alchemy was broad and profound. If he wanted to continue advancing, the support of theoretical knowledge was indispensable. Su Qian looked at Song Cheng's bright eyes and said slowly, have you heard of the periodic table of elements? What is the periodic table of elements? What does this have to do with my experiment? 10,000 question marks flashed across Song Cheng's mind. His breathing became more and more rapid, and he felt that he was about to touch the door of truth in alchemy. As a fanatic of alchemy, he was so excited that every hair on his body stood up. Before he could ask, he heard Su Qian say, the principle of alchemy is equivalent exchange. The mighty Marquis' mansion was located on the inner city's Kifu Street. This street was the territory of the nobles. Along the way, there were only marquises, counts, and dukes. The Weiwo Marquis was a hereditary title, and it had risen in the battle for the throne 300 years ago. He had inherited his position to this day, so he didn't actually have much power left. The side door opened, and a young girl with a slightly round face walked out, surrounded by maidservants and retinues. She was wearing a gorgeous silk dress, with a skirt that reached her heels, and embroidered shoes were faintly visible as she walked. At the age of 16 or 17, she had a pretty face, a pair of bright eyes, a proud temperament, and the flying spirit between her brows added to her aura, which was very attractive. Zhang Yueying entered the palanquin at the entrance. The palanquin driver carried the palanquin and slowly walked in the direction of Chenghuang Temple. Today, she was going to the city god temple to offer incense, eat vegetarian food, and then go to Uncle Wen Yuan's mansion to find her close friends to drink tea and chat. They would read the forbidden books that were secretly circulating in the ladies' boudoir and chat about which family's young master had reached the age suitable for marriage. They would comment on the outstanding students who passed this year's fall quarter examinations and guess if they would be able to enter high school next year's spring examinations. Perhaps his son-in-law was also inside? After walking 2 streets, the servant girl following the palanquin suddenly heard a commotion. For some reason, the 2 carriages behind them lost control. The coachman grabbed the reins tightly and waved the whip with a terrified expression. "Get out of the way, all of you, get out of the way." The pedestrians scurried in all directions to hide. "Quick, stop the carriage." The maidservant turned pale with fright. She ordered her retinue to intercept the carriage while ordering the sedan bearer to dodge. The retinue didn't have enough people and could only intercept one. The other one hit 2 sedan carriers and the sedan instantly flipped over. The remaining 2 porters and maidservants instinctively tried to save themselves and dodged to the side. The scene instantly became chaotic. After a short period of chaos, the 2 carriages continued to run away. The maidservant got up in a hurry and ran to the palanquin to check. Second miss, how are you?" No one answered. The servant girl's heart sank. She suddenly opened the curtain and was stunned. After a few seconds, she screamed, "Second miss is missing." The palanquin was empty. In a certain courtyard in the inner city. Zhang Yueying knew that she had been kidnapped, although she did not know who it was. She had been awake for a while. After her initial headache was relieved, she had been in a state of fear. As the Weiwu Marquis's concubine's daughter, her treatment was only slightly worse than the Di daughter, far better than the other sisters. Her father and mistress loved her very much, and the Di daughter of both her elder sister and cousin had an extremely good relationship with her. She had lived a life of luxury and was pampered. When had she ever encountered such a thing? Her surroundings were silent, her hands and feet were tied, and her mouth was stuffed with a cloth. She was extremely scared. Swish. Outside the courtyard, the sound of the door opening could be heard, followed by the sound of footsteps. Zhang Yueying's heart instantly tensed up. Fear exploded in her heart. She did not know what she was about to face, but it was definitely not a good thing. "Hey," the footsteps stopped outside the house, and someone laughed and said, "This woman is really beautiful. I just secretly checked her goods. She's beautiful." "You're so cheap," the other person paused and added, "You didn't even ask me to come along." Zhang Yueying was embarrassed and angry, tears welling up in her eyes. The 2 figures continued their conversation. "She's still a virgin." "Nonsense, the second daughter of the Weiwu Marquis is still married." Zhang Yueying was shocked. "They knew who I was and that my father was the Weiwu Marquis. How dare they kidnap me?" This meant that the mastermind behind this was not an ordinary person. "How do you think young Master Zhou will deal with this woman? Although she is an outstanding beauty, it doesn't seem safe to keep her." "Heh, you're thinking too much. At most, young Master Zhou will play with it for a while. When he's tired of it, he'll strangle it and bury it in this courtyard. Who knows? When young Master Zhou is tired of playing with her, let's have a few sips of the soup. This woman's skin is soft and tender, much more beautiful than the women in the brothel." That's right, if it wasn't for young Master Zhou wanting to try something new, we would have done her right now. Who asked him to be the son of the Vice Minister of Revenue? Let's go, and drink. That's not good, is it? It's almost dusk. We'll come back after we buy some wine. The sound of footsteps faded away, followed by the sound of the courtyard door closing. The two seemed to have gone out for a drink. Young Master Zhou? The son of the Assistant Minister of Revenue. The image of a young man in a brocade robe flashed across Zhang Yueying's mind as she recalled what had happened during the Lantern Festival last year. He was still thinking about her. I'm tired of playing. He drank some soup, burying the corpse in the yard to destroy all traces. The young lady, who had been raised in a rich family and carefully cared for, was so scared that she was trembling all over and tears flowed out of her eyes. She tried her best to make a sound as she twisted her limbs in an attempt to break free from the binding. Suddenly, he noticed that the rope around his wrist had loosened a little. Zhang Yueying suddenly froze, then quieted down. She no longer made any movements, but her hands were twisting hard. After an unknown period of time, the delicate skin on her wrist was torn from the friction, and she felt a burning pain. She finally opened the ropes. She immediately sat up, untied the rope on her feet, and tiptoed to the door of the room. She listened patiently for a moment, and after making sure that there was no one in the courtyard, she carefully walked to the courtyard. After looking around for a while, she gritted her teeth and ran at a speed that she had never achieved in her life. She rushed to the door of the courtyard and pulled the door bolt. The door was locked from the outside. Will you? Miss Zhang let out a cry of despair. On the street opposite the courtyard, Su Qian was holding a bowl of noodles in his hand, and Su Nian was standing beside him. You're good at dirty talk. Su Dalin provoked Erlang out of habit. Erlang ignored him and looked at the gate of the courtyard. Will she not be able to come out? Why did you lock the door? A strong desire to live will stimulate one's potential. Believe me, she will be able to come out. Just climb the wall. Su Qian took a sip of the noodles and explained in a low voice, the traces of not locking the door are too obvious. This small courtyard was a private house that Jolie had bought outside. There was a pretty woman living in the house. Now, the woman and the maidservant in the courtyard, a total of 4 people, were all locked up in the mirror by Su Qian. The small jade mirror could contain objects and living things. Su Qian had tried it on the servants at home. If it wasn't for that mirror, the plan to kidnap Miss Zhang would have been extremely difficult, and it might have even gone for wool and come home shorn. At this moment, the two of them saw a head pop out from the wall. It was Zhang Yueying, whose hair was in a mess. After carefully looking around for a while, he climbed over the wall and jumped down. She seemed to have sprained her ankle as she lay on the ground for a long time without moving. After a long time, she cried and got up. She held onto the wall and jumped as she escaped to the street. As a young lady from a wealthy family who lived a life of luxury, she had suffered a great grievance to be able to do this. They went out to buy wine and would be back at dusk. She looked at the setting sun and knew that she was really safe now. Perhaps they would be caught up after running a short distance, or perhaps they would run into each other after a few steps. Coincidentally, at this moment, a group of armed Imperial Saber Guards passed by. Zhang Yueying, who was afraid of encountering kidnappers or being caught by them on the road, seemed to have seen her savior and greeted them with tears. Before the royal sword guard could pull out his sword, he screamed, "I'm the daughter of the Weiwo Marquis. I'm being held hostage. Please save me." The royal saber guards looked at each other and immediately surrounded him. The surrounding commoners stopped to watch. The leader of the Imperial Saber Guard asked, "Who kidnapped you?" "It's Jolie, the son of Vice Minister Zhou of the Ministry of Revenue." Zhang Yueying broke down and cried. Thump thump thump, the drums of the curfew were sounded at the same time. Su Qian put the bowl on the side of the street and said, "Let's go. We'll find an inn to rest in. We'll go home tomorrow and wait for news." Chapter 58. 58 flag_1. Nighttime, the mighty Marquis's mansion. Marquis Wei Wu, who had the appearance of a wealthy middle-aged man, sat on the chair with an ugly expression. There were two beautiful women in the hall, one of them kneeling and crying her heart out. Another beautiful woman consoled in a low voice. His second daughter had mysteriously disappeared today, and combined with the carriage crash before the incident, the mighty Marquis concluded that his daughter had been kidnapped. He ran through the possible enemies in his mind, but it was unlikely to be a political enemy. After all, the title of nobility had been passed down to his generation, and he had gradually been excluded from the edge of the power stage in the capital. Of course, the nobles who gathered together were still an interest group that could not be ignored. However, there was still a difference between the whole and the individual. The mighty Marquis did not remember having such a political enemy who would risk everything to kidnap the women of his family. As for his enemies, he didn't make any enemies recently. The old master has already informed the officials and the golden guards at the city gates. Don't worry, Yang Er will be found. Elder sister, Yang Er is a weak woman. If she encountered something, even if we find them, we won't be able to live. The mighty Marquis's face twitched and his expression became gloomier. At this moment, a servant rushed in and shouted, "Lord Marquis, the young lady has been found." Marquis Wei Wu and his two madams rushed to the front hall and saw their daughter, who looked haggard and had tears on her face, as well as the imperial saber guards who had sent her back. After asking the housekeeper to send the royal saber guards away with the reward, the Wei Wu Marquis examined his daughter for a moment and heaved a sigh of relief. "Yang Er, what's going on?" Zhang Yueying was held in her mother's arms as she cried, "It was Assistant Minister Zhou's son who kidnapped me. Not only did he want to sully my innocence, he also wanted to kill me." He immediately told them what he had seen and heard, vividly adding how he had escaped from the wolf's den while the guards were careless. "Lord Marquis, you must seek justice for this concubine and for Yang Er." Zhang Yueying's mother was trembling with anger. "Lord Marquis, that Zhou has repeatedly humiliated Yang Er. He's also humiliating the Marquis's residence," the principal wife said in a deep voice. The mighty Marquis was furious and smashed the table with his palm. He was so angry that his entire body trembled. "That Zhou fellow is going too far." The next day, Meridian Gate, East Gate. The civil and military officials in the court were surprised to find that the Wei Wu Marquis came in armor today, but there was no weapon hanging at his waist. On this day, an interesting thing happened in the imperial court. The mighty Marquis put on his armor and went to the hall, bringing up his ancestors' merits and accusing Assistant Minister Zhou with a tearful voice. They shouted, "Our ancestors fought for the emperor and risked their lives. The daughter of the descendant was bullied, but the emperor didn't protect her. Wouldn't it chill the hearts of the soldiers?" The matter was blown up. The main culprit, Zhou, was dumbfounded. "When did I kidnap the second miss of the Zhang family? Why didn't I know?" Emperor Yuanjing flew into a rage and ordered the Supreme Court, Ministry of Justice, and Imperial Censorate to deal with the case and give a result within 2 days. As the suspect of the case, Zhou's first stop was the Imperial Censorate. The one in charge of interrogating him was the Imperial Censor. The rank 6 official sat in front of the table and without a word, he gave young Master Zhou a beating. After beating Zhou up to the point where he was crying for his father and mother, he hit the gavel and said, "Zhou, is the courtyard where the daughter of the Wei Wu Marquis is being held in your private residence?" "Yes." Zhou could only admit it. It was a very common phenomenon for powerful nobles to buy private houses in the inner city. When Zhou bought the courtyard, he did not go through anyone. His name was on the title deed, and the government had the procedure to purchase the house. Since it's your courtyard, then there's no need to say anything more. Sign here. 2 bailiffs came forward. One of them took out a letter of confession, while the other forced Zhou to sign it. According to the process of the review of the three departments, after the imperial censorate's trial, the verdict was handed over to the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice did not agree with the imperial censorate's result and wanted a retrial. Hence, young Master Zhou was sent to the Ministry of Justice. Here, his treatment had undergone a complete change. After filling his stomach with wine and meat, the Ministry of Justice's doctor in charge of the investigation considerately found a doctor to apply medicine on young Master Zhou's bloodied butt. After a few hours of interrogation, the Ministry of Justice overthrew the imperial censorate's results and determined that Zhou was innocent and that someone had framed him. The dossiers were handed over to the Court of Judicial Review. Without another word, the Supreme Court gave Zhou another beating. After a strict interrogation, the Supreme Court overruled the Ministry of Justice's verdict and found Zhou guilty. The next day, seeing that the Supreme Court, Imperial Censorate, and Ministry of Justice each had their own arguments and did not give a result, Emperor Yuanjing ordered a joint trial between the three departments, and the case escalated. The Court of Judicial Review had sent a chief and 2 deputy. The Ministry of Justice had sent 2 doctors and 4 managers. The Imperial Censorate had sent 2 imperial censors to patrol the city. A total of 11 officials were trying the case together. The camp of the joint trial was that the Ministry of Justice felt that Zhou was innocent and that he had been framed by thieves. The Supreme Court and Imperial Censorate unanimously determined that Zhou was guilty. The two sides wrangled for an entire day without a victor being decided, so naturally, there was no result. At dusk, a white-robed Directorate of Celestials was invited to the Yamen by an official. "I'm here to assist in the case under His Majesty's orders." After the white-robed man from the Directorate of Celestials stated his purpose for coming, he looked at Zhou, who was kneeling in front of the hall, and shouted, "Zhou, did you kidnap the daughter of the mighty Marquis, Zhang Yueying?" Zhou shook his head. "I didn't. It wasn't me. I was wronged." All the officials stared at the Directorate of Celestial. "Bai Yi. He's lying," the white-robed man said righteously. Zhou's face was bloodless. 3 days later, Assistant Minister Zhou was removed from his post and demoted to the army because he embezzled the money and grain of the Mo Kingdom's national treasury and didn't teach his son well. His son, Zhou, was exiled to the southern border. The 50 cavalrymen rode slowly on the official road. Second Uncle Su led the way on his horse, galloping forward proudly. After the news of Assistant Minister Zhou's fall, Su Pingzi had Su Qian and Su Erlang drink all night. There was the carefreeness of taking revenge, but also the relief of lifting a heavy burden. The two brothers rode behind Su Pingzi. Su Erlang said, "There's something I'd like to ask Big Brother." Su Dalan tilted his head and looked at him. "I'm curious why Zhou would admit to this crime. Or, could it be that the Marquis of Weiwu and the other big shots of the imperial court could not see through this not-so-brilliant framing?" Su Erlang muttered, "I've only thought of a part of it." To Assistant Minister Zhou's political enemies, it doesn't matter whether Zhou is innocent or not. They would use this bargaining chip to bite Assistant Minister Zhou to death. And to the mighty Marquis, this is a chance for revenge. In the past, he had not been able to defeat Assistant Minister Zhou because he did not have any helpers. Now was a heaven-sent opportunity. That was why the entire court was talking about him when he went to the palace that day. As for whether or not his daughter was kidnapped by Zhou, he may have his suspicions, but without sufficient evidence, it is clear that this eldest young Master Zhou who has repeatedly humiliated his daughter is even more hateful. What I can't figure out is that this matter was not done by Zhou. Assistant Minister Zhou and his accomplices are well aware of this and should have made a response. Why do you think I went to the Directorate of Celestials that day? Do you still remember the name of an 8th grade Directorate of Celestials? Su Qian laughed. A grade 8 aura watcher Su Niangzhen's eyes bloomed with a strange color, and he suddenly felt enlightened. During the tax case, the sorcerers of the Directorate of Celestials were involved in the tracking and trial of the case. This shows that the emperor is very dependent on the Directorate of Celestials. Su Qian looked ahead and said proudly. The case doesn't seem reasonable at first glance, but if we investigate it carefully, we'll find that there are no clues left behind. Well, I'm a professional in this area. In addition to the factional dispute, the case is bound to be troublesome and difficult to investigate. The simplest and most effective method is, of course, to find a sorcerer from the Directorate of Celestials. That's why Big Brother bribed the astrologers, Su Nian said. Vulgar. Su Qian spat and said frankly, it's an alchemist's business. How can you call it bribing? It's an equivalent exchange. After a pause, he said, farewell. Remember, in this world, other than blood relatives, any friend or enemy is because of the word benefit. This is especially true in the officialdom. No one will treat you well for no reason, and no one will hate you for no reason. Even if he's your best friend, he's only befriending you because your existence is of positive use to him. In the future, when you enter the court as an official, Big Brother hopes that you can be a capable official and not an honest one. Su Qian told his younger brother about his personal goods and said slowly, remember, be with the light. In order to nurture his little brother to become the great minister, he had to first make him take his own form. Otherwise, what was the use of cultivating a chief and assistant who had different paths? Su Zinian looked into the distance and said in a clear voice, the light. What if I get lost in the fog of power in the future? That's your own good fortune. Of course, if you resign and become a traitor, Big Brother will clean up the house. Su Qian said half-jokingly. All right. If Big Brother becomes a martial artist who wreaks havoc in the future, I'll do the same, Su Nian argued. Why do I feel like I've raised a flag? Su Qian coughed and looked at Su Pingzi. Second uncle, you have to be our witness. Get lost. Su Pingzi turned around and scolded, you keep saying that we're brothers from the same family. Do you think I don't exist? For this reason, I even looked into the process of solving cases in ancient times. Later on, I thought, why did I give so much ink to a small supporting role? Wasn't this messing up the main focus? With so much ink and brush, I can write and. Therefore, the essence was extracted, the factional dispute was highlighted, and the process of the trial was reduced. That thing is not interesting to write, so I don't think you'll like it. Assistant Minister Zhou's plot was the beginning of the entire volume. Chapter 59. 59. This child is too difficult, I can't teach him. 1. A group of carriages slowly stopped at the foot of Mount Qingyun. In the luxurious carriage, the eldest princess stepped down the small ladder and climbed up the mountain surrounded by soldiers. The mountain wind blew gently, ruffling her dress and hair. The noble and cold eldest princess faced the wind and squinted her bright eyes. She saw an old man with white hair in a pavilion on the mountainside. The old man was sitting in front of a table, and opposite him was a child. Next to the child was a young girl who had her head lowered and was doing a needlework. She was stunningly beautiful. How many times have I told you, you must hold the brush properly, the old man said in a deep voice. Then why don't you change it back, the old man asked. Change what? Forget it. I won't write today. You can follow me and recite the three-character classic. The old man sighed and cleared his throat. At the beginning of a man's life, his nature is good. What's sex at the beginning of life? At the beginning, people are good by nature, the teacher said. The child, human, he's good by nature. Why did you stop in the middle? I forgot, the child replied. Sir, let's start over. At the beginning of life, people are good by nature. The master was going crazy. Outside the pavilion, the eldest princess couldn't help but laugh. A smile appeared in her clear, mirror-like eyes, and in an instant, her beauty was brought to life. The old man recognized the eldest princess and immediately stood up, respectfully bowing, "Greetings, eldest princess." The elegant and cold eldest princess nodded slightly, her voice as clear as ice. When did Yunlu Academy have so many young children? The old man turned his head and motioned for the two sisters to come over and greet him. Su Lingyu stood up and bowed. Su Lingying, on the other hand, looked at the woman whose chest was as big as her mother's, and whose temperament and appearance were even better. The child is rude, please don't blame him, eldest princess, the old man said awkwardly. He wasn't too anxious. Although the eldest princess was cold, elegant, and noble, and no one dared to offend her, she was a scholar and her heart was not inferior to a man's. The old man continued. The two of you are the family members of the academy's students. Because of family matters, the female family members are temporarily staying in the academy. Shelter the wise eldest princess immediately analyzed the meaning of his words. She examined the beautiful girl and the not-so-smart child, then smiled. Which student? She was considered half a student of the academy and knew the rules of the academy well. Without the consent of the great Confucians, the female students could not live on Mount Qingyun. My brother wishes for the new year, Su Lingyu said in a soft voice. She didn't mention Su Qian because her big brother wasn't a student of the academy. New Year's Day, the eldest princess's eyes flickered. She had investigated Su Qian's background and immediately recalled the brotherhood between the two. The mastermind behind the tax silver case was Assistant Minister Zhou, and about 10 years ago, Su Qian had a conflict with Assistant Minister Zhou's son in the downtown area. The Grand Princess looked at the pretty girl and said in a gentle tone, "When did this happen?" "It's almost 10. Su Lingyu said. He and Kwei knew each other, and Kwei knew that Assistant Minister Zhou was involved in the tax and silver case. From this, it could be seen that the ordinary and unremarkable official would also know about this matter. He knew that he had offended Assistant Minister Zhou, so sending the women of his family to the academy was a good way to deal with it. However, wouldn't it be better for the whole family to escape the capital? The female family members were sent to the academy, but the men in the family were still in the capital, so what was he planning? Thinking of the fuse that had caused Assistant Minister Zhou to resign and replace his army, the eldest princess narrowed her beautiful eyes and nodded slightly. She continued to climb the mountain with her guards. The pavilion. The eldest princess looked at Zhao Xiao and was slightly surprised. I haven't seen you in 10 years, but you look so different. In the past, the dean was slovenly dressed, his long white hair hanging down, and the gloominess between his brows accumulated. Today, his eyes were clear and bright, his will was condensed and not revealed, and he was in high spirits. Zhao Xiao didn't answer directly. He laughed and said, "The sage said that there is no age in learning, and the one who has reached the top is the first." The young and the old were the most important in learning. What he meant was that there was someone who could be his teacher, and the person was not old. Could it be related to the sky-piercing air in Tianya Temple? She was very interested in the changes in the Quasi-Saint Academy and had a strong desire for knowledge. This was because it involved the battle for the orthodoxy of the Confucians and the future structure of the imperial court. What happened that day? The Quasi-Saint Academy had been sealed off, and no one was allowed to enter. The night watchman was also helpless. The eldest princess gathered her scattered thoughts and looked at the dark green bamboo forest outside the window. She sighed, "Principal, do you know about Assistant Minister Zhou being dismissed from his post and forced into the army? For the great Feng officialdom, this is only the first step in the curtain of the factional dispute." Zhao Xiao shook his head with a smile and didn't want to talk about it anymore. He waved his hand to summon the chessboard and said, "Ever since Li Mubai defeated Wei Yuan 3 times, he has stopped playing chess. There aren't many people in the academy who can compete with me. Since the eldest princess is here today, then accompany this old man to play a game. Playing chess with me, there's no need for you to humiliate yourself," the eldest princess said helplessly. On the other side, in the attic built on the adjacent cliff, the 3 great Confucians had just finished their discussion when the page boy delivered a letter. saying that the eldest princess was visiting the academy and had someone deliver it. The eldest princess said in her letter that a great piece of work had recently appeared in the capital city. The scholars in the capital city talked about it with great relish, and the Imperial College regarded it as the #1 poet in the past 100 years, suppressing the Yunlu Academy's farewell poem. Moreover, compared to the sending-off poem, this top poet of 100 years came from the teaching workshop division. It was a talented man and a beautiful woman. The story was more interesting and widely spread. At the end, the eldest princess attached this poem that had exploded in popularity within the capital circle of scholars in just a few days. I've been in seclusion for several days, and a stunning piece of work has appeared in the capital. Zhang Shen focused his eyes on the accompanying poem. Zhang Shen was like a statue. He was silent for a long time. He gently put down the paper in his hand and looked at Li Mubai and Chen Tai, who were drinking tea and chatting. "Chunjing, Yuping, take a look at this," Zhang Shen said. His sudden serious expression caused the two great Confucians to be stunned. Li Mubai took the paper and quickly scanned through it. His eyes then became serious and his relaxed posture disappeared. "Let me see." Chen Tai saw their expressions and took the paper. After reading it, he savored it for a long time. Chen Daru let out a long sigh. "Thin shadow, dark fragrance. You've described the unparalleled charm of the plum blossom in just 2 sentences. You're really clever." Li Mubai then commented, "Ningyan's poem is known to everyone. It makes people feel heroic, but the meaning is profound. The elegance of the lyrics, the outstanding charm they're indeed far apart." Zhang Shen stroked his beard and sighed, "This poem is an unparalleled song about the plum blossoms. Who is this Yang Ling? I've never heard of him having such talent." Chen Tai read the book again and said, "It seems to be a scholar from Changle County who wrote this poem in the Imperial Academy and gave it to the top courtesan Fu Xiang." At this point, the tea room fell silent. None of the 3 great scholars spoke. A sour smell fermented and spread in the air. Zhang Shen pondered for a long time and said, "I think we should inform the dean immediately and recruit the scholar into the academy. Such a talent must not be buried." "That's reasonable," Chen Tai and Li Mubai agreed. On this trip to pick up his aunt and sisters, Su Siju and Su Ningjian, as students, first paid a visit to their teacher. The 3 great Confucians had just finished their lecture and knew that a student they valued had come to visit them. Thus, they gathered in the hall to drink tea. Zhang Shen first glanced at the disciple whose temperament had changed and said with satisfaction, "Farewell, it seems that copying the words of the saints has been of great benefit to you." Su Siju nodded in embarrassment. Li Mubai was surprised, "Copying the words of a sage can help you enter the cultivation realm. How come I didn't notice it?" Su Erlang opened his mouth but chose to remain silent in the end. He had indeed touched the threshold of the physical cultivation state, but that was only after he saw the 4 lines his big brother had written on the stone tablet. This was a subtle process. However, it was not good to say this in public, even if everyone knew the source of those 4 sentences. After chatting for a while, Chen Tai glanced at Li Mubai and Zhang Shen. He laughed and said, "The 2 of you are living in the capital, but do you know that a masterpiece has recently appeared in the capital?" The water was clear and shallow, and the fragrance floated in the moonlight. "Wonderful, wonderful. Ningjian, although you are talented in poetry, don't be too proud of yourself. You must know that there are many talented scholars in the world. This old man is just jealous that we have a good student." However, he couldn't refute such mature words. Zhang Shen could only say, "This poem is indeed amazing. Ningjian, you don't have to take it seriously. It's useless to take it seriously. It's a song about the plum blossoms." Li Mubai nodded, "Even though scholars nowadays lack some spiritual energy, there's still an exception. That Yang Ling might not be able to compose a second poem. And with Ning Yan's poem, it's very likely that he'll have a third and a fourth one in the future. Su Nian glanced at his cousin and said, "This poem was also composed by my big brother." Chapter 60. Chapter 60 The Night Watchman's Doors. Point 1. Hearing this, Chen Tai, who was drinking tea, spurted it out. Li Mubai and Zhang Shen both froze. They suddenly turned their heads and glared at Su Qian. The person who wrote the poem wasn't Yang Ling. "Little brother, are you itching for a beating? You're selling me so straightforwardly. That's my alias," Su Qian replied. "Really? Really? What are you going to the Imperial Academy for?" The two still didn't believe him. "Young man Muai," Su Qian sat up straight and said. The room suddenly fell into silence. The three great Confucians felt that there was a blood clot in their chest. They wanted to vomit but couldn't. Few seconds later, Zhang Shen stood up and pointed at Su Qian's nose. You. He paced around the room, extremely anxious. "You're going to sing the Song of the Ages on a prostitute. Is she worthy? Is she worthy?" Yes, I'll use it on you," Su Qian cursed in his heart, but on the surface, he pretended to listen to the teacher's admonishment. Li Mubai was also very emotional. "If you want to sing about the plum, then so be it. Yangmei Pavilion offers floating incense is simply vulgar and unbearably vulgar. You've ruined a good poem. If it could be changed to Yunlu Academy gifted to Mr. Mubai, you should be able to laugh out loud like a pig," right? Su Qian ridiculed in his heart. 2 lines of poetry became an ancient name. It was indeed a waste to use it on a prostitute. However, one could not just look at the surface. If this poem had not won the favor of the Fuxiang courtesan Belle, how could he have gotten any useful information? How did he frame Jolie? If he didn't frame Jolie, what if Assistant Minister Zhou made it through? What if his political enemies didn't defeat him? What would be the outcome of the Su family? Poems were copied to begin with, so there was no heartache. Besides, if he couldn't solve the problem at hand, what was the use of having more in his stomach? No matter how good the poem was, it was only useful if it could be exchanged for real benefits. Chen Tai sighed in his heart. At first, he was surprised and did not believe that Yang Ling was Su Qian's alias. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was reasonable. How could such a poetic talent appear just like that? If Li Mubai and Zhang Shen can accept him as their disciple, I can too. Since there are 2 teachers, why can't there be 3? Chen Darrow secretly decided to find an opportunity to take this talented poet under his wing. After a round of verbal bombardment, Su Qian admitted his mistake obediently and promised that if he had any good poems in the future, he would let the 2 teachers modify them first. Li Mubai and Zhang Shen were barely able to calm down. Other than the regret of brushing past the famous poem, the 2 great Confucians really felt that it was a waste for Su Qian to use the poem on a courtesan of the academy. It was a waste of heavenly resources. Su Nian still had some conscience and came out to smooth things over. He changed the topic. "My younger sister has been in the academy for many days. I wonder if there is any effect." The 3 great Confucians looked at each other, and Chen Tai couldn't help but laugh. "That sister of yours is truly determined and indestructible. In 10 days, 4 teachers have changed," Zhang Shen said helplessly. Li Mubai added, "They all swore that they would never be enlightened by a child in their lives." Su Siju and Su Ningjian were speechless. In the small courtyard, the family reunited after a long time. His aunt welcomed her husband and precious son with joy, while his second uncle hugged his daughter and wife with joy. When Su Ling saw her father, she was overcome with sorrow. She hugged his leg and wailed. Second Uncle Su felt pity for his daughter. He thought that his daughter had suffered a lot in the academy. The teachers in the academy must be very strict. Su Lingyu, who was wearing an indigo gown, stood at the side. The girl's thin oval face had a slight smile as she watched this scene. She was old and couldn't throw herself into her father's arms like a little kid. She wasn't the eldest son, so she wasn't as loved by her parents as her elder brother. The children in the middle were always more embarrassed. I haven't seen you for 10 years, but younger sister has lost a lot of weight. Su Qian walked over, held her sister's hand, and examined her carefully. Her waist was tied with a belt, and her chest began to swell. The girl's budding figure was particularly attractive. She had an oval-shaped face and big eyes. She looked flawless from afar and up close. She lacked the gentleness of a woman, but she had the pure beauty and agility of a young girl. Su Lingyu subconsciously pulled her hand away, but she held it back. The temperature of her big brother's palm made her face blush, and her eyes rippled. She called out softly, "Big brother." On the way home, Su Lingyu suggested riding a horse for the first time, but because she didn't know how to ride, she got her father's permission to ride with Su Qian. The sun was warm, and the wind was a little cold. Riding in the winter was like riding a motorcycle in the winter without a helmet. After all, Su Lingyu was a woman. She held Su Qian's arms tightly and looked at the scenery around her with bright eyes. She felt a sense of security that she had never felt before. Su Nian also had a sister in his arms. "Second brother, I'm going to throw up." "Then let's go back to the carriage." "I don't want to. I want to ride on your neck." Su Erlang was annoyed by the little bean and frowned. The ant in the carriage lifted the curtain and peeked out her beautiful face. "Master, did you go out to fool around while I was away?" Su Nian and Su Qian said in unison, "No, I didn't." Auntie sized the two of them up. "It's not like I'm asking you." 3 days later, on a break. In the early morning, Su Qian was fiddling with a small jade mirror. The mirror reflected the shadows of the military crossbow, the bronze mirror, and the padao, like a blurry painting. He was using the mirror as a storage bag for now. All sorts of things were placed inside. They arrived at the main residence and had breakfast. At the dining table, Su Lingyu said with an expectant expression, "Big brother is taking a break today, let's go out for a walk." Second Uncle Su recalled the incident of Jolie riding a horse a while ago. He frowned and said, "I'm also taking a break today." "Lingyu, father will accompany you out." Su Lingyu pondered for a moment and shook her head. "Forget it, I suddenly feel a little dizzy." Second Uncle Su. "In the morning, I'll go to the bar and listen to music. At noon, I'll go home and take a nap. At night, I'll go to the black market. I have to break through to the chi refining stage." Suki-san was wandering outside. At this moment, the gatekeeper old Zhang hurriedly came to report and stood in front of the hall. "Master, there are 2 officers outside the door." "Uncle officer." Su Pingzi took a sip of the porridge and asked casually, "Where did you come from?" "Big brother, is he your colleague?" Su Erlang asked. "I don't think so," Su Qian said indifferently. "I don't know," old Zhang said, but they were dressed in black and had strange gongs tied to their chests. The Su family's young masters' hands trembled as they looked at each other silently. They could see the seriousness in each other's eyes. "The night watchman. Quickly, welcome him in." Su Pingzi quickly got up and walked to the front hall. Su Qian and Su Nian followed behind him, their minds spinning as they thought about the purpose of the night watchman's visit. In the Dafeng dynasty, the words night watchman did not have a good meaning. It was often associated with bloody words such as guilty, imprisoned, and confiscated. However, if he asked himself honestly, with second Uncle Su's status, the night watchman would not be interested in him. Soon, the 3 of them met the night watchman in the front hall. The 2 of them were dressed in standard black clothes with short capes hanging behind them. A copper gong engraved with complicated incantations was tied to their chest. The 2 night watchmen were both young men. The one on the left had a serious expression on his face and did not smile. The person on the right was the complete opposite. He had a smile on his face and his eyes were narrowed into a line. The young man who was smiling with his eyes narrowed glanced at the three Su family masters and said, "Which one of you is Su Qian?" Su Qian took a step forward. "I am." "Come with us," the teenager with squinty eyes said. Su Pingzi's eyebrows twitched. He stood in front of Su Qian, cupped his fists, and said in a deep voice, "Milords, what did my nephew do wrong?" The serious-looking young man frowned. "If you don't do anything wrong during the day, you won't be afraid of the night watchman at night," said the other with a smile. With the night watchman's style of doing things, if he resisted arrest, would he draw his knife and cut people on the spot? Su Qian pressed a hand on his second uncle's shoulder and looked at the two night watchmen. "All right, I'll go with you." He followed the night watchman out of the Su mansion. There was a carriage parked at the door. The serious-looking night watchman pointed at the carriage and motioned for Su Qian to go in. The smiling young man took off the gong on his chest and hit it hard. With a loud and clear sound, he said, "The weather is dry, be careful of the fire." The watchman's yamen was located in the inner city, far from the Su manor. It would take several hours to walk there. So, they arranged a carriage for Su Qian not because he had special treatment, but to save time. The stern night watchman drove the carriage. In the carriage, Su Qian and the young man with a warm smile sat face to face. "Why is the night watchman looking for me? For the sake of Jolie's case? Impossible. I can't guarantee a perfect crime, but I can guarantee that the Daifeng dynasty, which has no surveillance facilities, can't find out that I kidnapped the second miss of the Zhang family. Even if there were some clues, they wouldn't have been able to lock onto me so quickly." Su Qian reached into his pocket and gently touched the back of the jade mirror. He poured out a silver note and took it out. It was 10 taels. He heaved a sigh of relief. He sincerely handed over the silver notes and said, "This lowly one is a law-abiding citizen. I admire you for serving the country and the people, and for your hard work. I offer 10 taels of silver to invite you to drink tea. If your excellency can tell me what happened, I will be very grateful." The watchman's gaze fell on the silver notes, and he smiled with his eyes narrowed innocently. The night watchman has strict rules. If he takes a bribe of more than 10 taels, he will be caned 50 times. If he takes more than 50 taels, he will be exiled. More than 100 taels, beheaded. I obviously don't need to be caned for 10 taels of silver. Su Qian smiled awkwardly and was about to take back the silver when he heard the young man with squinty eyes say, "You want to get information from me, you have to pay more." Su Qian handed over 30 taels of silver without hesitation. The young man smiled and his eyes narrowed into a line. He kept the 2 silver notes in his arms and handed the other one to the curtain. "I've taken 30 taels. You and I each have 10 taels. The remaining 10 taels will be for the Academy's tea ceremony tonight. It's exactly 5 taels per person." The unsmiling young man took the silver notes and grunted in a low voice. The young man with narrow eyes crossed his legs and smiled at Su Qian. "Rules are important, but when everyone tacitly ignores the rules, if you take it too seriously, you'll be excluded." Part 4 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.